It was a moment no one saw coming. The bustling courtroom fell silent as Elon Musk, the billionaire tech mogul who had defied the odds time and time again, stood before a panel of judges, facing the harsh scrutiny of the public eye. The once untouchable visionary, who had launched rockets into space, revolutionized the electric car industry, and promised to change the world, was now at the center of a brutal legal battle that threatened to undo everything he had built. Mr. Musk, is it true that your tweets cost investors millions of dollars? The voice of the prosecutor echoed through the courtroom, sharp and unforgiving. Elon didn't flinch. His gaze was focused, but his jaw clenched ever so slightly as if he could feel the weight of every word. The room buzzed with anticipation. Reporters from all over the world had gathered to witness this moment, and everyone was waiting for him to crack under the pressure. But Elon didn't crack. Instead, he stood tall, the same man who had once boldly declared that humanity's future was among the stars, the same man who made headlines daily for his unfiltered tweets and unorthodox ideas. Today, however, it was his words that were under scrutiny. Today, it wasn't about launching rockets, it was about saving face. The room felt stifling, heavy with judgment, as the prosecutor continued, each question aimed at chipping away at his reputation, piece by piece. Do you really believe, Mr. Musk, that your online statements were simply misunderstandings? And that they didn't affect the stock market or the livelihoods of countless individuals? Elon opened his mouth to respond, but then something happened. A flicker of doubt, something almost imperceptible, crossed his face. The confidence that had once defined him felt momentarily out of reach. His mind raced, not just over the legal implications of the case, but also over his personal life, the pressure of being a father, a CEO, and a visionary. The weight of the world's expectations pressing down on his shoulders, making him feel, for just a split second, as though he were no longer in control. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. It wasn't just the legal battle that had people on edge, it was the stakes. This was Elon Musk, the man who had challenged every convention, every norm, and yet, for the first time, he appeared vulnerable. It was a side of him that few had ever seen. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The voice of the courtroom videographer, likely instructed to keep things light amidst the tension, cut through the moment. But for Elon, there was no escape. The question, even if intended for the online audience, lingered in his mind: what pushed him forward when everything seemed to be falling apart? For the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure. As the prosecutor continued with relentless questions, Elon couldn't help but replay his journey in his mind. He thought of the late nights at the drawing board, the countless failures and setbacks that almost ended his career on multiple occasions. He thought about SpaceX, Tesla, and the early days of PayPal. He thought about the endless people who had doubted him, the voices that had told him he was crazy, and the near misses that had almost brought him down. Yet, every time, he had picked himself up. Every time, he had risen stronger, more determined. But now, this was different. Was this really just a simple misunderstanding, or had he truly crossed a line this time? He was about to respond when another voice broke through the tension. Your Honor, with all due respect, the defendant is being harassed with questions that are irrelevant to the case at hand, said the defense lawyer, a composed man with a stern voice that seemed to cut through the room. This is not about personal vendettas or attacking someone for their success. This is about a legal matter, and we demand that the focus remain on the facts. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience, nodded slowly. I agree. Let's keep the questions on track. Elon let out a slow breath, grateful for the brief respite, but the damage had already been done. The questioning was far from over, and he knew it. The media, the public, everyone was watching, waiting for him to either crumble or rise to the occasion. His every move would be scrutinized, and for the first time in years, he felt like the world was watching him, not as a visionary, but as a man on trial. The prosecutor didn't miss a beat. "Mr. Musk, do you take responsibility for the consequences of your actions?" Elon paused for a moment. A question like this could make or break him. The world had always painted him as a rebel, a genius who could do no wrong. But this was different. This time, he had to show that he wasn't above the law. That he was human, with flaws and mistakes, but still capable of learning and growing. He cleared his throat. "I take full responsibility for my actions, but I also believe that there's more to the story. I am not perfect. I've made mistakes, and I'm willing to own up to them. But I've also made decisions based on a vision that I believe will change the world for the better." The courtroom fell silent. The media leaned forward, catching every word. "For all the mistakes I've made, I've also created companies that are working to make humanity a multiplanetary species. I've created jobs, built technologies that have revolutionized industries, and I am trying to solve the world's energy crisis. But none of that matters if I don't take responsibility for my words and actions," he continued, his voice steady, though the weight of the moment was not lost on him. There was a long pause as the prosecutor took a moment to gather their thoughts. For the first time, Elon Musk felt as though the tide might be turning. Perhaps, just perhaps, this would not be the end of his journey. Perhaps this could be the beginning of something even greater. "Thank you, Mr. Musk," the prosecutor finally said, their tone still sharp, but now tinged with a hint of uncertainty. Elon exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The tension in the room was palpable, but for a brief moment, he allowed himself to hope. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he had thought. Maybe, just maybe, this legal battle could lead to something more profound. As the day's session came to an end, the media buzzed with speculation. Would Elon Musk survive the brutal roast in court? What would happen next? The world was watching closely, and the questions were only just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't born into the Silicon Valley glamour that would later define his life. His story began thousands of miles away, in the quiet, sun-drenched streets of Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971. The Musk family wasn't wealthy or privileged by any stretch of the imagination. His father, Elon Musk, was an electromechanical engineer, and his mother, May, was a dietitian and model. They provided for their children, but nothing about Elon's early life suggested that one day, he would become one of the most influential and controversial figures in the world. From a young age, Elon displayed a fierce curiosity and an insatiable desire to understand the world around him. His childhood was filled with books. As a boy, he spent most of his time reading, consuming information about everything from technology to physics. He had an early fascination with computers, and by the age of 12, he had already taught himself computer programming. He created a video game called Blaster, which he sold for $500. It was a modest beginning, but it ignited the spark of entrepreneurship that would burn brightly throughout his life. Elon's childhood wasn't all about technology. He had a difficult relationship with his father, who was often absent and reportedly harsh in his dealings with Elon. His mother, on the other hand, was his anchor, offering support and encouragement through the struggles. Elon often recalled feeling isolated at school, a result of both his intellect and the fact that he was an outsider in a country with deep social divisions. The bullying he endured would later become a defining part of his personality. It was this sense of alienation that drove him to prove himself, to show the world that he could be something greater than the sum of his humble beginnings. By the age of 17, Elon decided to leave South Africa, partly to escape the grip of apartheid and partly to seek out new opportunities. He moved to Canada, enrolling at Queen's University in Ontario. It was here, in the relative obscurity of a small college, that Elon began to forge the path that would eventually lead him to the top of the tech world. After 2 years at Queen's, Elon transferred to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. There, he earned degrees in both economics from the Wharton School and physics from the College of Arts and Sciences. It was during these years that Elon began to develop his grand vision, to change the world, not just in one area, but across multiple industries. He wasn't just interested in making money, he wanted to build the future. Elon's time at Penn was pivotal. He quickly began to surround himself with like-minded individuals, people who were just as hungry for success and innovation as he was. He also began to understand the power of leveraging technology to solve the world's biggest problems. Elon had always been a visionary, but during these years, his vision began to crystallize. In 1995, after graduating from Penn, Elon moved to California, the birthplace of many of the most influential tech companies. He enrolled in a PhD program at Stanford University, but after just 2 days, he dropped out. The tech world was calling, and Elon wasn't one to wait. It was the kind of decision that would define him, to pursue his dreams with relentless focus, to take risks and never look back. Elon's first entrepreneurial venture in Silicon Valley was Zip2, a software company he co-founded with his brother Kimball. Zip2 was a city guide software for newspapers, and it was a hit. After just a few years, the company was sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million. For most entrepreneurs, this would have been the pinnacle, but for Elon, it was merely the beginning. After the sale of Zip2, Musk founded X.com, an online payment company. X.com would eventually evolve into PayPal, and under Musk's leadership, it grew rapidly. However, in a twist of fate, Elon was ousted from the CEO position, a move that would ignite a fire within him that would burn for years to come. Despite the setback, Musk took the $180 million he made from PayPal's acquisition by eBay in 2002 and set his sights on something bigger, something that would change the course of human history. It was then that Musk founded SpaceX, with a vision to make space travel more affordable and ultimately enable the colonization of Mars. He also took the helm of Tesla Motors, a company that sought to revolutionize the automobile industry with electric vehicles. While his ventures were bold and audacious, Musk faced numerous challenges along the way. SpaceX was initially met with skepticism, and Tesla struggled to gain a foothold in the automotive market. However, Musk's resilience and his ability to defy conventional wisdom eventually paid off. SpaceX became the first privately funded company to send a spacecraft to the International Space Station, and Tesla's electric cars began to challenge the dominance of traditional automakers. Musk's other ventures, including SolarCity and the Boring Company, continued to push boundaries in areas such as renewable energy and transportation infrastructure. Elon's ambition was limitless, and so were the challenges he faced. He was constantly battling not just against competitors, but against the perception that he was a reckless billionaire who was more interested in headlines than in practical results. But Musk had something that many of his detractors didn't, a vision. A vision of a future where humanity was no longer confined to Earth, where we could travel to other planets and tap into renewable energy sources that would save the planet. Behind the public persona, however, was a man who wrestled with personal demons, a man who had been through multiple divorces, faced constant media scrutiny, and was often at odds with his own employees. But it was this very complexity that made Musk so intriguing. He was not just a tech genius, he was a human being grappling with the weight of his own ambition. It wasn't just his personal struggles or his vision of the future that made Elon Musk such a polarizing figure. It was the way he approached life, with intensity, with fearlessness, and with an unwavering belief that he could do the impossible. Musk's willingness to challenge not just the status quo, but his own limits, made him both a hero and a villain in the eyes of the world. And now, as he stood in that courtroom, facing a legal battle that threatened to undermine everything he had worked for, Elon Musk was once again being tested. Would he continue to rise, or would this be the moment that finally brought him down? As the trial continued, the stakes were higher than ever. The public, already divided on Musk's legacy, waited to see if he could once again defy the odds. Would the world's most audacious tech entrepreneur crumble under the pressure, or would he prove that he was, as always, unstoppable? As the trial progressed, the courtroom became a battlefield, not just for legal battles, but for the heart and soul of Elon Musk. With each passing day, the tension mounted. Musk was no longer simply a businessman facing a lawsuit, he had become the symbol of everything the world had come to expect from Silicon Valley's boldest innovator. The questions being asked of him were no longer just about his actions or his business decisions. They were about his character, his motivations, and the very essence of who he was. It was a situation he had never truly anticipated. In the past, Musk had always found ways to dodge the doubters, the critics, and even the countless legal challenges that seemed to follow him like a shadow. His charm and ambition, combined with his status as a technological pioneer, had often shielded him from real consequences. But now, the stakes were different. This wasn't about a lawsuit over a business deal gone wrong. This was about his entire legacy. And it wasn't just the lawyers asking questions anymore. The press, the public, and even those closest to him seemed to be joining in the chorus of judgment. His tweets, once seen as bold declarations from a forward-thinking entrepreneur, were now being dissected under the harshest of lights. The social media posts that had propelled his company's stock prices to new heights, and, just as easily, caused them to plummet, were now the subject of legal scrutiny. "I just want to understand, Mr. Musk," the prosecutor said with calculated calmness, as she pointed to the projection on the wall behind them. It was a chart showing Tesla's stock fluctuation. "Can you explain to this court how your public statements about taking Tesla private at $420 a share didn't mislead investors?" The entire room went silent. Musk's eyes flicked from the projection to the prosecutor and then back again, his mind working in overdrive. There it was, the moment where his words, those seemingly harmless comments, were being used as the sword that could cut through his entire career. "Do you not understand the consequences of those tweets, Mr. Musk?" she pressed, her voice rising just enough to fill the room with palpable tension. "Do you not see how they led to billions of dollars in losses for investors?" He had been asked similar questions dozens of times by now, but the weight of it was starting to sink in. He didn't want to be here, in this room, under this kind of scrutiny. He had always been a man of action, a man who focused on the future, on building new possibilities. Legal drama was something he never anticipated having to face head-on. But here it was, forcing him to confront a version of himself he rarely allowed the world to see, the human side of him, vulnerable and uncertain. Elon rubbed his hands together, his gaze now fixed on the prosecutor. "I understand the consequences, but I never intended for anyone to get hurt. The idea of taking Tesla private was something I had discussed with my board of directors. It was an honest attempt to protect the company from outside pressures. The tweet wasn't meant to manipulate or mislead. It was an expression of frustration, a momentary lapse in judgment, but it wasn't malicious." The prosecutor's lips pressed into a tight line, as if expecting the answer but not accepting it. "A lapse in judgment, Mr. Musk, that caused irreparable damage to a number of innocent investors. Can you really look at yourself in the mirror and tell them it was just a lapse? Just a mistake?" Musk clenched his jaw. "I didn't mean to mislead anyone. But I did make a mistake. I'm not perfect. I never claimed to be." The words hung in the air. He could feel the tension tightening, the weight of responsibility pressing in on him from every angle. He was used to being in control, but this was different. For the first time in a long time, the control seemed to be slipping away from him, piece by piece. The prosecutor continued, as if she could sense the crack in his armor. "And this isn't the only time you've used your platform in such a reckless manner, is it, Mr. Musk? What about the funding secured statement from 2018? How do you explain that?" The room buzzed as the prosecutor brought up one of the most controversial moments in Musk's public life. That fateful tweet in 2018 had stated that Musk had funding secured to take Tesla private at $420 per share, a claim that caused the stock price to surge, only for it to come crashing down once the truth came out. Musk had no such funding in place. Elon's face tightened. This was the one moment that had haunted him the most. The one where his own ambition had gotten in the way of good judgment. A moment that would forever be tied to his legacy. The idea of losing control, even for an instant, had been terrifying to him. But now, in this courtroom, he had to face the consequences. "I misjudged the timing, and I misjudged how it would affect investors," Musk admitted, his voice lower now, tinged with regret. "I made a mistake. But I also took responsibility for it. I settled with the SEC, and we moved forward. I've learned from it." The prosecutor seemed to relish this moment, the glimmer of weakness she'd found in Musk's words. "You've learned from it, Mr. Musk? Is that what you think the investors who lost millions should be left with? A lesson learned? Or is this just another example of your disregard for the people who have placed their trust in you?" Musk felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't want to be the villain in this story. He didn't want to be the bad guy. But no matter how hard he tried to explain himself, he couldn't escape the truth: his actions had consequences. And those consequences had caught up with him. As the trial went on, the questions became sharper, the pressure building with every passing moment. Musk began to feel the weight of his past mistakes settle heavily on his shoulders. The courtroom became more than just a place of legal proceedings, it felt like a mirror, forcing him to confront the reality of who he was and what he had done. The tide was turning. There was no denying that. The public's perception of him was beginning to shift, and the same people who had once worshipped him for his brilliance now seemed to question whether he was, in fact, the genius he claimed to be. The billionaire who had once been seen as a visionary was now being portrayed as reckless, irresponsible, and out of touch with the very people he had promised to help. The prosecutor's final words that day echoed in his mind as he left the courtroom, surrounded by his legal team and a cloud of reporters. "This trial isn't just about you, Mr. Musk. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that people like you, people who hold the power to change the world, understand the impact of their words and actions." Elon paused for a moment, his heart racing. The words stung, but they were true. His words, his decisions, they mattered. And in the end, he would have to prove that he could learn from his mistakes, or risk losing everything. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a battle for his legacy. And the outcome of this trial would determine whether Elon Musk could emerge from the flames stronger than before or whether this would be the moment that defined his downfall. The tension was only just beginning. The weight of the trial hung heavily on Elon Musk's shoulders as he sat alone in the quiet of his office, the hum of his laptop the only sound in the room. The trial had taken a personal toll on him, but he couldn't afford to lose focus. His mind was elsewhere, on the bigger picture, on the future, on the next step. The world was waiting for him to slip, for him to falter, but Elon was determined not to give them the satisfaction. In the last few days, the media frenzy surrounding the trial had only grown. Headlines about the case dominated every news outlet, painting Musk as either a genius entrepreneur who had made a few mistakes or a reckless billionaire who had put investors and his companies in jeopardy. Public opinion was split, and the pressure was beginning to feel unbearable. But Musk had faced worse. He thought back to the early days of SpaceX, when his rockets were nothing but a pipe dream, and he had nearly run out of money with no clear path forward. Or Tesla, where he had invested almost every cent he had to keep the company afloat, despite the skepticism of the entire auto industry. Elon had survived the darkest of moments before. But this trial, this legal battle, was different. This wasn't just about his companies or his future. It was about his very identity, his name, his legacy. Elon knew that in the grand scheme of things, the battle in the courtroom would eventually be forgotten. What mattered was what came next. He had to keep moving forward, keep fighting for the world he dreamed of. But how? It was then that his phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. The message was from Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX, a woman he trusted deeply. "We need to talk. Urgent." Musk stood up, his heart racing. He had never liked the word urgent in any context. He quickly dialed her number. "Gwyn," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What's going on?" "Meet me in the conference room in 10 minutes, she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for debate. "There's something you need to see." He didn't ask questions. If it was urgent enough for Gwyn to call, it was important. He walked briskly to the conference room, his mind racing. Was this about SpaceX? Was it a problem with the Mars mission? Or something even more critical? As he entered the room, Gwyn was already there, her laptop open in front of her. The look on her face was grave. "What is it?" Musk asked, his mind still on the trial, but his focus now shifting to Gwyn's expression. "We've just received a report from our Mars program team," she said, sliding a piece of paper toward him. "The new Starship prototype is ready for the next phase of testing. And we've hit a major milestone." Elon's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected this. It was exactly the kind of breakthrough he needed, a glimmer of hope, a sign that the world was still moving forward, that everything wasn't falling apart. But it was more than just a technological breakthrough. SpaceX had faced setback after setback, including failed launches, technical malfunctions, and near-death experiences with some of their earlier prototypes. To hear that the Starship, the ship that Musk believed would one day take humans to Mars, was ready to move forward was a game-changer. "This is big," he said, a sense of excitement building in his chest. "This is exactly what we need." "But what's the issue?" Gwyn leaned in, her expression serious. "The issue is that we need more funding. The Mars mission is huge, Elon, and it's going to take more than we've budgeted for. The investors we've been working with are starting to question whether this project is viable. They want results, not just dreams." Elon's mind raced. He had always known that space exploration was the long game. But the reality of it, the resources, the commitment, the relentless pursuit, was more challenging than anyone had anticipated. And now, with the courtroom drama unfolding and SpaceX facing pressure from investors, it felt like his world was about to implode from all sides. "I can't afford to lose this," Musk muttered to himself. "Not now." Gwyn's voice broke through his thoughts. "We need to prove we can deliver. The next step for Starship is a major test flight, and it needs to happen soon. If we can successfully launch this prototype, it could give us the momentum we need to secure additional funding. But if it fails..." Musk looked at her, his jaw tightening. He had been here before. The odds were always stacked against him. But that was never enough to stop him. Failure wasn't an option. Not now, not with everything on the line. He looked at the report again, his mind working furiously. He couldn't afford to lose sight of this. The world was watching. If SpaceX succeeded, it could prove to everyone that his vision was more than just a pipe dream. It could be the future of humanity. It could be his legacy. "I'll get the investors," Musk said, determination in his voice. "And I'll make them believe in it. I'll make them see what's possible." Gwyn nodded, but there was an edge of caution in her eyes. "We need this to work, Elon. We need to turn the tide. Because right now, we're at a crossroads." Elon looked at the Starship prototype on the screen, then back at Gwyn. It was a turning point, not just for SpaceX, but for everything he had worked for. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment that could change everything. He took a deep breath. "Let's do it. We've come too far to turn back now." As he walked out of the conference room, his phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Tesla's board. The email was short and to the point: "The situation is getting worse. The board wants answers. Now." The trial wasn't the only battle he was fighting. But Elon Musk had never been afraid of a fight. And this time, he wasn't going to just win, he was going to change the game forever. The stakes were higher than ever. The world was watching. And for better or worse, Elon Musk was going to show them exactly what he was made of. The days leading up to the Starship launch were some of the most intense of Elon Musk's life. The pressure was insurmountable, on his shoulders, on SpaceX, on Tesla, and on everything he had worked for. The courtroom trial was still looming, the media attention had not wavered, and every step seemed like a tightrope walk, balancing his career, his companies, and his reputation. He knew the stakes had never been higher. The night before the launch, Elon couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, his mind whirring with 1,000 different thoughts. He had pushed everything to the edge. He'd spent months rallying investors, explaining the vision, the purpose of the Mars mission, selling it as humanity's next frontier. He'd done everything he could to keep SpaceX moving forward, but deep down, he knew that if this test flight failed, it could be the end of everything. He thought of the courtroom, the harsh glare of the prosecutor's questions, and the way he had felt vulnerable. The public's perception of him, once that of a brilliant innovator, was now starting to shift. The relentless headlines about his mistakes, his reckless tweets, and his legal battles had created a storm that he couldn't control. It wasn't just his companies that were at risk anymore, it was his legacy. Elon got out of bed and walked over to the window of his sprawling private residence. The moonlight shone through, casting a silver glow across the vast expanse of land that surrounded him. His gaze drifted to the horizon, where the SpaceX headquarters lay in the distance. Tomorrow was the day, the test flight would either propel him to new heights or bring everything crashing down. He took a deep breath, trying to quiet the storm inside his head, but it wasn't easy. His thoughts turned to his family, his children, the ones who depended on him, the ones he wanted to make proud. What kind of legacy was he leaving for them? A legacy of risk, of brilliance, or of reckless ambition? The uncertainty gnawed at him. The sound of his phone ringing broke the silence. He quickly answered, the voice on the other end instantly recognizable. "Gwyn?" Elon asked, trying to mask the tension in his voice. "Elon, we need to talk." Gwyn's voice was calm but firm, her usual level-headedness only slightly shaken. "I'm here at the launch site. We've got a problem." A chill ran down Elon's spine. "What's going on?" "The test flight, it's not going as planned. We've had a few issues with the prototype's engines. It's not catastrophic, but we need to decide whether to delay the launch or push forward." Elon's mind raced. Delaying the launch wasn't an option. It would send the message that SpaceX wasn't ready, that they weren't capable of the kind of innovation they claimed. But pushing forward with a compromised prototype could also be disastrous. If this failed, it wouldn't just be a setback, it could destroy everything he had built. "How bad is it?" Elon's voice was steady, but the weight of the decision was beginning to press on him. "It's manageable, but we're cutting it close. If we go forward, it'll be tight. But we believe the engine is still stable enough for launch," Gwyn explained. "We just need to make the call." Elon's pulse quickened. He could almost hear the countdown clock in his mind, ticking down to 0. His reputation. The future of SpaceX. Everything was riding on this. "I trust you, Gwyn," Elon said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind in his chest. "Make the call, and let's do this. We move forward." Gwyn didn't hesitate. "Understood. We'll go for it." The line went silent, and Elon stood there, staring at the phone in his hand. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had made the decision, the only decision that made sense, the one he'd been pushing toward for years. But now, in this quiet moment before everything would unfold, the weight of it all hit him hard. This wasn't just about rockets or electric cars. It was about everything. His future, his dreams, his legacy. The pressure to succeed, to prove himself again and again, was suffocating. But he couldn't back down. Not now. Not when the world was watching, and not when he had come this far. Elon closed his eyes, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. He had been here before. The night before a breakthrough. The moment before the leap. And yet, this felt different. This time, it wasn't just about rockets soaring into the sky, it was about whether his vision would survive the trials of life. The next day, at the SpaceX launch site, everything seemed to move in slow motion. The massive Starship prototype loomed in the distance, a testament to years of innovation, a symbol of humanity's potential to reach the stars. But to Elon, it felt like the culmination of every sacrifice, every mistake, every doubt. This was the moment. The moment where everything would either fall into place or shatter beyond repair. Elon stood with Gwyn and the rest of the team, eyes fixed on the Starship. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation, but there was an undercurrent of anxiety that hung over everything. The engine issues had been dealt with, but no one knew for sure whether the launch would succeed. This was a delicate balance of science and hope. "Are you ready?" Gwyn asked, turning to Elon. He nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The courtroom trial, the media circus, the personal toll of the past weeks, it all faded into the background as he focused on the one thing that mattered, the future. "I'm ready," he said, his voice resolute. The countdown began. 10. 9. 8. Elon's heart raced, the sound of the countdown reverberating through his chest. The entire team held their breath, watching the massive rocket on the launch pad. Every eye was on the rocket, every ear attuned to the faint hum of engines powering up. 7. 6. 5. Elon's mind raced with memories of SpaceX's early struggles, of the countless failures, of the doubters. He thought of the time when he had nearly gone bankrupt, when everyone had told him that his dreams were impossible. And now, here he was, on the brink of proving them all wrong. 4. 3. 2. "Liftoff," Gwyn whispered. The ground trembled as the Starship's engines roared to life, lifting off the ground with a force that seemed to defy gravity itself. For a moment, everything was perfect. The rocket soared into the sky, cutting through the clouds, and for a fleeting second, Elon allowed himself to believe that this was it, the beginning of something monumental. The next step toward Mars. But then, just as quickly as the rocket had launched, something went wrong. A massive explosion rocked the sky, sending a shockwave through the crowd. The rocket, once full of promise, had erupted in a ball of fire, the dream shattered in an instant. For the briefest moment, everything went silent. Then the roar of disbelief and shock filled the air. Elon stood there, frozen. The weight of the failure hit him harder than anything else ever had. The trial, the pressure, the public eye, it all seemed to crumble in this one explosive moment. This wasn't just a setback. It was everything. And as the smoke from the explosion billowed into the sky, Elon Musk felt the weight of the world crashing down on him. The emotional climax had arrived. The silence that followed the explosion seemed to last forever. Elon stood, his eyes fixed on the plume of smoke rising from the remains of the Starship prototype, the flames flickering in the distance. It was a sight he never imagined he'd see. A test flight gone wrong wasn't uncommon in the world of space exploration, but this was different. This wasn't just another failure. It was a devastating blow, not just to SpaceX, but to everything he had worked for, everything he had fought to prove. Gwyn Shotwell stood beside him, her face pale, her eyes locked on the disaster unfolding before them. She had always been the calm, collected voice in the chaos, but now, even she was at a loss for words. Elon could feel the weight of the eyes upon him, the whole team watching, the media already capturing every detail, broadcasting the failure to the world. He had promised them a new era of space exploration, a bold new future for humanity. And now, that future seemed to be slipping through his fingers. "Is it over?" Gwyn asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. The fireball in the distance was a clear indication that the mission had failed. Elon exhaled slowly, his mind racing, trying to find the right words, but they wouldn't come. His mouth was dry, his mind a blur of emotions, frustration, disbelief, anger, and a sense of crushing responsibility. He had failed his team. He had failed the vision. The entire mission, everything they had worked for, seemed to have crumbled in an instant. No, Elon finally said, his voice barely a whisper, but there was a quiet resolve in his tone. It's not over. This is just the beginning. Gwyn turned to him, searching his face for any hint of doubt, but all she saw was that familiar spark, the same determination that had gotten SpaceX off the ground, the same resolve that had allowed Tesla to survive against the odds. He wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. The media storm erupted immediately. Headlines screamed, Elon Musk Starship test flight ends in disaster, SpaceX's bold Mars dreams crushed in fiery explosion. The world watched in shock and disbelief as the images of the launch failure dominated every screen. There were pundits, critics, and analysts, all eager to dissect the crash, to predict the death of SpaceX's future. But behind the scenes, Elon and his team were already hard at work. As the fire at the launch site smoldered, Elon gathered his leadership team in a private room to discuss the next steps. The failure was undeniable, but there was something that could still be done, something that could turn this moment around. Look, Elon began, addressing the room full of weary, anxious faces. We've been here before. We've failed before. But that's not the end of the story. It's just part of it. He paced back and forth, the weight of his words sinking in. SpaceX didn't rise to where it is by being perfect. It rose because we didn't give up. Every time we failed, we learned, we adapted, and we came back stronger. This time will be no different. Gwyn nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation but also the opportunity it presented. They could use this failure to fuel their resolve. The road to Mars was always going to be paved with setbacks. The world wouldn't understand the journey, but they didn't need to. What mattered was that they kept moving forward. Elon looked around at his team, each person absorbed in their own thoughts, processing the failure in their own way. I want everyone to stay focused. We will fix the problem, we will test again, and we will succeed. And when we do, we'll prove everyone wrong. The room was quiet for a moment, but then, one by one, the team members nodded in agreement. They had been through difficult times before, but this was the man who had turned SpaceX into what it was, a symbol of resilience, of unyielding belief in the impossible. We'll make it work, Gwyn said with a firm nod. The room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of determination. SpaceX would not fold. They would rise again, as they always had. As the days passed, Elon couldn't escape the media's constant scrutiny. But something in him had shifted. He had always known that space exploration would be fraught with challenges, but now, those challenges felt more personal. The failure of the Starship test flight felt like a blow not just to his company, but to his entire identity. His vision had been questioned, his intentions misunderstood, and yet, he knew this was just another part of the journey. The legal battle over the Tesla tweets, still ongoing, weighed heavily on his mind. His mistakes, his impulsive moments of grandeur, were now on full display for the world to see. The once untouchable image of Elon Musk was now fractured, splintered by the pressures of the public eye, the courtroom, and the weight of his own expectations. He had to make a choice. He could retreat into the shadows, accept the criticism, or he could continue to move forward, determined to prove the doubters wrong. Late one night, sitting in the quiet of his office, Elon reflected on everything he had built, not just the companies, but the belief that anything was possible. He remembered his childhood dreams, the far-reaching ambition to make life multiplanetary, to solve the world's energy crisis, and to reshape industries with groundbreaking innovation. None of that had been easy, and none of it had come without sacrifice. But he wasn't done yet. The failure of Starship wasn't the end of SpaceX. It wasn't the end of his vision. It was a part of the process, a test of his resilience, of his ability to bounce back when the odds were stacked against him. And so, Elon Musk made a vow to himself that night: he wouldn't be defined by this moment. The future he was fighting for was still out there. Mars was still within reach. His mission was far from over. As the first rays of dawn began to break through the windows, Elon made a decision. It was time to get back to work. The world was watching, waiting for him to fail. But Elon Musk was determined to show them what happens when you refuse to give up, when you keep pushing, no matter the cost. The journey was far from over. The days that followed the disastrous Starship test flight were some of the toughest Elon Musk had ever faced. The pressure was relentless, the media were unforgiving, and his detractors were louder than ever. But through it all, something inside him refused to break. The sting of failure wasn't new to him, nor was the weight of public scrutiny. If anything, it had only fueled his resolve to prove everyone wrong. But the question that lingered on his mind was, where do we go from here? Elon had always been a forward thinker, someone who didn't linger too long in the past. The failure of Starship was a setback, yes, but in his mind, it was just another obstacle to overcome. And SpaceX wasn't built to shy away from challenges. They had failed before, and they had always come back stronger. Now was no different. He called for a meeting with Gwynne Shotwell, the COO of SpaceX, and the rest of the leadership team. They needed to come up with a plan, a clear roadmap to get the company back on track and, more importantly, get the Starship program back in the air. Sitting around a large conference table, the team could feel the weight of the failure hanging in the air, but also a sense of purpose. Elon had a way of inspiring that quiet determination, and even in this dark moment, it was palpable. We have one mission now, Elon began, looking at each of the team members. To fix this problem. To learn from our mistakes. And to keep pushing forward. I refuse to let this be the end of SpaceX or our dreams of colonizing Mars. Gwynne, as usual, was the voice of reason. She understood the immense pressure that everyone was under, but she also knew that SpaceX was no stranger to setbacks. She wasn't going to let this failure define them. Agreed, Gwynne said, her voice calm but firm. We need to analyze exactly what went wrong with the launch. We have to figure out whether it was a hardware failure, software, or something in the testing process that we missed. Elon nodded. We'll dig deep. But we can't waste too much time on the past. The sooner we can get another prototype ready for launch, the better. We've already lost time, and the world's watching us now. Every second we're down is a second they'll use to say we're finished. The leadership team agreed, and they immediately set up specialized teams to examine every component of the failed Starship flight, the engines, the software, the ground systems, and even the communication protocols. They would leave no stone unturned. While the technical team went to work, Elon had another pressing concern: the public image of SpaceX. The world had witnessed the failure, and now, the media circus would only grow louder. Elon knew that if they didn't address the issue head-on, they could lose the support of their investors, customers, and even the employees who had worked tirelessly for years to make this vision a reality. He decided to hold a press conference. It was time to face the world and be transparent about the failure. He wasn't going to hide behind corporate jargon or make excuses. He would take full responsibility for what had happened. But he would also make it clear that this was not the end. The day of the press conference arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. Journalists filled the room, eager for answers, cameras flashing, reporters huddled together, waiting to catch a glimpse of the elusive Elon Musk. The world was watching, some hoping for his downfall, others silently cheering him on. Elon had always been a polarizing figure, but today, there was no room for ambiguity. He had to speak directly to the people. He stepped up to the podium, his usual confidence intact, but there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He wasn't here to be the charismatic CEO everyone knew, he was here to be a leader who took responsibility. The launch didn't go as planned, Elon began, his voice steady but with an undertone of regret. In fact, it ended in failure. And that's something we take very seriously at SpaceX. Our goal is to make life multiplanetary, and we can't afford to make mistakes like this. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. But let me be very clear, Elon continued, his eyes scanning the room. We've been here before. In fact, we've failed more times than I can count. And that's why we're still here. Because we learn from our failures. We improve, we adapt, and we come back stronger. This test flight was just one step on a much longer journey. The dream of getting to Mars, of making humanity a multiplanetary species, is not over. It's just beginning. A murmur ran through the room, the reporters scribbling notes, some of them skeptical, others intrigued. Elon knew there would always be naysayers, but he was used to it. He had dealt with criticism his entire career. What mattered was not the applause he received, but the resolve to move forward no matter the cost. I want to thank everyone at SpaceX for their incredible dedication. This failure doesn't define us. It only motivates us to work harder. We're already working on the next iteration of Starship, and we'll be ready to launch again soon. We won't stop until we get it right. With that, he turned to leave the podium, but not before giving the media one last message. Failure is just a stepping stone. And I'll take every step necessary to reach our destination. As the press conference concluded, the atmosphere was electric. The media had gotten what they wanted, an answer from Elon Musk himself, one that balanced accountability with optimism. He had done what he set out to do, he had shown that the failure would not break him or SpaceX. In fact, it might have even solidified his image as a visionary leader willing to face the tough moments head-on. In the days that followed, the media frenzy continued, but something had shifted. The public had begun to see the failure not as the end of SpaceX, but as part of the journey. Elon's message of resilience resonated with many. Investors remained on board, and SpaceX employees rallied behind their leader, motivated by his refusal to quit. As for Elon, he knew this wasn't the time to rest. The next challenge awaited, and this time, he would be ready. The lessons learned from the Starship test failure would drive them toward success, no matter how long it took. With his focus back on the future, Elon Musk took the next step toward the stars, and this time, nothing would hold him back. Elon Musk stood before the massive, half-completed structure of the next Starship prototype. The SpaceX facility in Boca Chica, Texas, had always been the heart of the company's ambition to send humanity to Mars. But today, it felt more like the battleground for a war that he couldn't afford to lose. His reputation was on the line, and so was the future of SpaceX. In the wake of the failed test flight, the pressure was mounting. There was no time to waste. The world's eyes were on him, watching to see how he would respond. Elon knew that if they didn't make it right this time, if the next launch didn't go according to plan, it could mean the end of SpaceX's vision, and possibly the end of his career as a groundbreaking entrepreneur. But Elon Musk wasn't someone who backed down in the face of adversity. He thrived in it. His resilience was his trademark, and the Starship program was more than just a business venture. It was a dream. His dream. "We've been here before," he said quietly to Gwynne Shotwell, who stood beside him. "But this time, we can't afford to fail." Gwynne nodded, her eyes focused on the towering rocket before them. "We've learned from the last failure. We've got this." The team is more determined than ever. As the SpaceX engineers worked tirelessly to perfect the next prototype, Elon found himself pushing the boundaries even further. This time, they weren't just fixing mistakes. They were re-engineering their entire approach to ensure that nothing would go wrong. The technical teams had analyzed the previous failure from every angle: the engines, the heat shields, the software, and the testing protocols. Every detail had been scrutinized, and a new approach had been developed. But there was one thing Elon knew for sure: no matter how much preparation they put into it, they couldn't predict everything. "We'll make it work," Elon repeated to himself, his voice steady but full of resolve. It wasn't just a mantra, it was a mission. The days bled into weeks, and the countdown to the next test launch began. Each day brought new obstacles to overcome, delays in the manufacturing process, supply chain issues, and of course, the ever-present media scrutiny. Every movement of the rocket, every piece of equipment, was under the microscope. The entire world was watching. But Elon was used to the pressure. He had faced it before, and it only fueled his drive to succeed. There was something almost poetic about it, the pressure, the public eye, the scrutiny. It reminded him of the early days of Tesla when everyone doubted him, when they thought electric cars were a joke. But now, electric vehicles were no longer a novelty, they were a staple of the modern world. SpaceX had the potential to be the same. Mars was the final frontier, and Elon was determined to make that frontier a reality. As the day of the next test approached, the tension in the SpaceX facility was palpable. Engineers, technicians, and support staff worked around the clock to ensure everything was in place. Elon walked through the facility, speaking to the teams, offering words of encouragement, and inspecting the work with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made SpaceX the company it was. At one point, he stopped by the Starship's engines, still in the final stages of assembly. He stood there for a moment, staring at the massive rocket, as if searching for any signs of imperfection. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "This is the moment we prove that we belong in the history books." But there was no time to bask in the gravity of the moment. The test launch was coming up fast, and there was still work to be done. The night before the test flight, Elon found himself standing alone on the observation deck, staring out at the rocket on the launch pad below. The facility was eerily quiet, the hum of machinery and the distant sounds of people working creating a low, steady background noise. The world outside seemed far away, almost irrelevant. In that moment, there was only the rocket and him. He thought about everything that had led to this point, the sacrifices, the failures, the sleepless nights, the criticism. It had all brought him here. And if this test flight succeeded, it would mean something even bigger, the future of humanity. But Elon wasn't thinking about the glory of success. Instead, he was focused on the one thing that could derail everything, the risk. The failure. It could happen again. "Everything we've done has led to this," he said quietly to himself. "We can't afford to let it slip away." Just then, Gwyn walked up beside him, her footsteps quiet on the concrete. She joined him at the railing, both of them watching the rocket. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "We've done everything we can," Gwyn said eventually, her voice calm but carrying the weight of the moment. "Tomorrow is just another step. We'll handle it." Elon nodded, though he knew tomorrow would be far from just another step. The test flight was the next crucial phase, and this time, it couldn't end in failure. "Thanks for being here," Elon said softly, turning to face Gwyn. "You've always been a steady hand in this madness." She smiled slightly. "Someone has to keep you grounded." They shared a quiet laugh, but underneath it, there was an unspoken understanding of how high the stakes were. Gwyn had been with SpaceX from the very beginning, and like Elon, she had weathered the ups and downs. They were both in this for the long haul, no matter what. The day of the test flight finally arrived. The countdown clock was ticking down, and the energy at the SpaceX facility was electric. The engineers and technicians had done their work, and now it was time to see if all their efforts would pay off. Elon stood in the control room, watching the countdown as it ticked closer to zero. His heart raced, his mind a whirl of thoughts. This wasn't just a test flight, it was the culmination of years of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears. The final moments before launch felt like an eternity. But as the countdown hit zero, a surge of excitement flooded the room. "Launch sequence initiated," the voice from the control panel announced. For a brief moment, everything seemed suspended in time. And then, The engines roared to life, and the rocket shot into the sky with a deafening roar. Elon watched intently, every second feeling like a lifetime. But this time, everything went right. The engines fired perfectly. The rocket soared through the sky, and the dream of Mars, seemed just a little bit closer. As the rocket disappeared into the sky, Elon felt a surge of relief, but there was no time for celebration. The flight wasn't over yet. There would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time in weeks, Elon felt a spark of hope. They had done it. And now, the future was theirs. The days following the successful test flight of Starship were nothing short of euphoric for SpaceX. The media, who had once doubted the company's ability to recover from the catastrophic failure just weeks before, were now praising them for their perseverance and resilience. Elon Musk was once again the toast of the tech world, his bold vision of making humanity a multiplanetary species back on track. The entire SpaceX team was still buzzing with energy after the launch, but Elon gathered his leadership team in the war room at the Boca Chica facility. His face was serious, his mind already several steps ahead. "We've done it," Elon said, breaking the silence in the room. "But this is just one step. We're not finished yet. If we want to send humans to Mars, we have to keep pushing. We can't afford to get comfortable." Gwynne Shotwell, standing at the head of the table, nodded. "Absolutely. The test flight was a huge success, but we need to ensure that it wasn't a fluke. We need more data, more testing, and more refinement. We need to prove that this rocket is ready for long-term space travel." Elon leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Exactly. Every launch from here on out needs to be flawless. The stakes are too high. Mars isn't just an idea, it's our future." There was a quiet determination in the room. Everyone knew what was at stake. SpaceX had already pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible, but now they had to demonstrate that they could maintain that momentum, and that they could keep proving the doubters wrong. As the next series of tests began, Elon spent even more time in Boca Chica, overseeing every detail, speaking with engineers, and watching over the modifications to the Starship prototype. SpaceX's engineers were working harder than ever, making continuous improvements based on the results of the test flight. Despite the successful launch, there were still obstacles to overcome. One of the main concerns now was ensuring that Starship could withstand the long duration of a Mars mission. The harsh environment of space, the uncharted risks of landing on the red planet, and the massive scale of the spacecraft required complex solutions that couldn't afford to fail. The stakes were higher than ever, and as they tested various systems, from the life support system to the heat shields to the landing protocols, Elon found himself reflecting on how far they had come, but also how much further they still needed to go. While SpaceX was the world's most advanced private space company, Elon had no illusions about how tough this journey was going to be. Mars was still a distant, dangerous destination. But with the first successful test flight, they had proven that it was possible. And that spark of possibility was enough to fuel him for the next leg of the journey. The months passed quickly, with the SpaceX team working day and night, tirelessly pushing toward their goal. And in that time, something incredible began to happen. The world's perception of SpaceX had shifted. No longer were they just a private space company, they were the company leading the charge toward humanity's future beyond Earth. Investor confidence surged, and the support from the scientific community grew stronger. More importantly, people began to believe in Elon Musk's vision. His dream of Mars was no longer just a pipe dream or a fantasy. It was becoming real. And that made all the difference. On a personal level, the success also changed Elon. The pressure he had been under for so long seemed to ease, though he knew the hardest part was still ahead. The success of the test flight gave him the confidence to push forward, but it also made him realize how deeply he was tied to this mission. Mars wasn't just his obsession, it was his legacy. One afternoon, as the sun was setting over Boca Chica, Elon stood alone on the observation deck, gazing at the nearly completed Starship prototype on the launch pad. The air was warm and still, the sound of distant construction humming in the background. It was a peaceful moment, but it was also a reflective one. Elon thought about all that had led to this point, the failures, the ridicule, the sleepless nights, and the doubt. But most of all, he thought about the incredible potential that lay ahead. He'd seen the future of humanity in his mind's eye for years. The city on Mars. The thousands of people living and working on the Red Planet, building a new society. It seemed like an impossible dream, but now it felt more like an inevitable reality. But despite the optimism, the path ahead remained uncertain. The technological hurdles were immense. The risks were still monumental. And the timeline was aggressive. But Elon wasn't one to shrink from a challenge. He had always believed that the best way to predict the future was to create it, and now, more than ever, he had the resources and the team to make that future a reality. At the next press conference, Elon's tone was slightly different. There was a quiet confidence in his voice as he addressed the world's media, and yet there was still an undercurrent of intensity. He was no longer speaking about the future of SpaceX in terms of if it would happen, but rather when. Today, we are closer than ever to making interplanetary travel a reality, Elon said, his eyes scanning the audience. This test flight is just the beginning. What we've learned here will take us to the next step, and the next step after that. SpaceX is not just launching rockets, we are launching the future of humanity. Mars is no longer a distant dream. It's within our reach. The applause was thunderous, but Elon's mind was already focused on the next challenge. The dream of Mars was no longer a distant goal. It was now a tangible mission with deadlines, milestones, and very real stakes. As the press conference ended and the crowd began to disperse, Elon stood for a moment, looking out over the sea of reporters and fans. He knew this was only the beginning. There was still so much work to be done. The next step. Mars. And nothing would stand in his way. The press conference had ended, and Elon Musk was once again thrust into the spotlight. While the world cheered for SpaceX's monumental progress, Elon's thoughts were elsewhere, focused on the inevitable hurdles that lay ahead. The atmosphere at SpaceX was electric with optimism, but beneath the surface, there was an unsettling feeling that the road to Mars was going to be more perilous than anyone anticipated. It was one of those quiet evenings when Elon found himself alone in his office at the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. His desk was cluttered with reports, engineering schematics, and prototypes, but his mind was preoccupied with the bigger picture. There was no doubt that the success of the Starship test flight had been a massive milestone, but Elon wasn't someone who could rest on his laurels for long. The next step was always more daunting than the last. As he stared out the window, watching the evening sun dip below the horizon, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to face the most difficult phase of the mission. He was no stranger to risk, in fact, he thrived on it. But even he knew that space travel, especially a mission to Mars, came with a complexity that could unravel at any moment. Just then, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Gwynne Shotwell walked in, her face serious but composed. She didn't have to say a word for Elon to know she was concerned. He could see it in her eyes. She'd been with him through thick and thin, and she wasn't about to sugarcoat things now. "We need to talk," Gwynne said, sitting down in the chair across from his desk. Elon nodded, pushing aside the schematics. "What's on your mind?" "You know that next test flight we've been planning," she began, her voice steady but carrying a weight of concern. "We're running out of time, and we're still facing some pretty significant technical issues. There are a few components of the heat shields that still haven't been fully tested, and we're behind schedule on the Raptor engines. If we push too hard, we could run into more issues than we can solve in time." Elon frowned, but he didn't flinch. He'd heard these concerns before. "I'm aware of the setbacks. But we've made it this far. We're not stopping now." Gwynne sighed, leaning forward. "Elon, you've pushed us hard. We're all in this because we believe in the mission, but you need to think about the consequences. If we fail, we risk the entire program. And the risk is higher than ever. The weight of her words settled in the room like a dense fog. Elon could feel the doubt creeping in, but he pushed it aside. Failure isn't an option, he said, his voice firm. If we fail, we try again. And again. I won't let this dream die. But at what cost, Elon? Gwyn replied, her voice tinged with concern. You've made history already. SpaceX has proven the world wrong. But we're facing a crossroads. We can either move forward at a pace that's unsustainable, or we can step back, reassess, and make sure we're prepared for the next big leap. That might mean more time, but it could also mean fewer risks. Elon stared at her, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of him. He knew that SpaceX's next steps were critical, and every decision he made would shape the future of the company and, by extension, humanity's future in space. But what if pushing forward too quickly meant disaster? For the first time in a long while, Elon allowed himself to acknowledge the doubt. Could they really make it to Mars? The mission had seemed so clear from the beginning, but now it felt like there was so much that could go wrong. The pressure of the responsibility, the expectations from investors, from the public, and from the media, it all bore down on him. You're right, Elon finally said, his voice quieter than usual. We've come so far, but the road ahead isn't as certain as it once seemed. Maybe it's time we reevaluate. Gwyn smiled slightly, a sign that she understood the gravity of the conversation. No one's questioning the mission, Elon. We all believe in it. But we have to be smart about how we get there. Elon took a deep breath, trying to find the right balance between his unyielding drive and the reality of the obstacles ahead. He had always been a visionary, but this moment, the moment when the dream of Mars could either become a reality or dissolve into dust, was the hardest he had faced. In that silence, he realized that he couldn't do this alone. The success of SpaceX wasn't just about him, it was about the entire team. And they had to be on the same page if they were going to succeed. The next few days were filled with intense meetings. Elon and his leadership team reviewed every aspect of the mission, from the construction of the Starship prototype to the testing of the heat shields and the engines. Engineers ran simulations, and every team member brought forward their concerns and suggestions. There was a new urgency to their work, not just to complete the project, but to ensure that it was done right. The discussions were heated at times, with Elon pushing his team as hard as he always did. But there was a new awareness in the room, a shared understanding that the risks involved were not to be taken lightly. After all, it wasn't just about launching a spacecraft. It was about sending humans to Mars, to an unknown world where anything could go wrong. Gwyn, as always, kept her cool, helping to mediate the various perspectives. We need to focus on what we can control, she said in one meeting. We know the risks, but we also know that we're capable of doing something that no one else has even come close to doing. But we can't do it at the expense of our people's safety. Elon nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. He was aware of the risks, but he was also aware of the potential. There was too much at stake to back down now. They had to succeed. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. The media was relentless, and investors were growing increasingly anxious. The world was watching, and with every passing day, the expectations only grew higher. But Elon had been through worse. He had faced down countless doubters in the past, and he knew that the future of humanity depended on his ability to continue moving forward. Despite the doubts that crept into his mind, Elon pushed ahead, refusing to let fear dictate his decisions. Mars was no longer just a dream. It was a destination. And the countdown had already begun. There was no turning back. One evening, after another exhausting day of meetings and tests, Elon once again found himself alone on the observation deck at Boca Chica. The launch pad stood in front of him, bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. It was a moment of quiet reflection, the calm before the storm. He looked out at the stars, wondering if they would ever see the day when humans would walk on Mars. It seemed so far away, but at the same time, it felt closer than ever. Tomorrow, the countdown would continue. And Elon knew that no matter how many obstacles lay ahead, he would keep pushing forward. Because the future of humanity depended on it. And for him, there was no turning back. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the weeks passed, Elon Musk's sense of urgency grew. The test flights had brought them closer to their goal, but every day that passed without a successful launch, every technical glitch, and every doubt from the media made the stakes feel higher than ever. SpaceX was at a crossroads, teetering on the edge of an incredible breakthrough, or a catastrophic setback. The countdown to the next crucial test flight was underway. With the systems almost ready, Elon gathered the SpaceX team for their final review. There was no more room for mistakes. If this test didn't go as planned, the entire Mars mission could be delayed by months or even years. At SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, the mood was tense. Engineers, designers, and executives huddled in the war room. The walls were lined with data screens and projections of the upcoming launch. The smell of coffee lingered in the air as the late hours approached, and yet, despite the sense of urgency, there was an almost palpable calm in Elon's demeanor. He had been through many challenges before, and while this was undoubtedly the most significant one, Elon knew this was the moment that would define the future of SpaceX. "All right, team," Elon began, his voice steady, commanding attention as it always did. "We know the risks. We've been here before, but this is the real test. It's not just about Starship's ability to fly anymore. It's about making sure we're ready for the ultimate mission. Mars." His words hung in the air, setting the tone for the meeting. The systems are in place. The heat shields are upgraded. Raptor engines have passed every test. Now it's all about execution. We need to prove to ourselves, and to the world, that we are capable of overcoming the impossible. This test is the linchpin. Gwynne Shotwell, who had stood by him through every challenge, stood up to address the room. The path to Mars is not going to be easy. But what we've done here in Boca Chica, and what we've achieved with Starship, shows that we're capable of things others think impossible. It's time to prove them wrong, and, more importantly, prove it to ourselves. Elon nodded, his expression thoughtful. He had always known the road ahead would be difficult. What had begun as an impossible dream, sending humans to Mars, was now within reach. But despite the immense pressure, Elon was determined to succeed. As launch day approached, the stress was palpable. The engineers had tested and retested every component of the Starship prototype. The crew was ready, but the weight of what was at stake weighed on everyone's shoulders. In the final days before the test, Elon spent more time in Boca Chica, checking in on the team, observing the preparation, and getting hands-on with the launch vehicle. But there was something in the air now, a quiet realization that they were on the brink of something far bigger than a successful test flight. They were about to test humanity's future. On launch day, the SpaceX facility was filled with a mix of anticipation and nerves. The launch pad was set, and the Starship prototype sat proudly in its place. The team huddled around, monitoring every data point, every fluctuation, and every potential issue. Elon stood with Gwynne, his eyes focused on the countdown clock. "Are we ready?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension. "We're as ready as we'll ever be," Gwynne replied, her face a mask of concentration. "Everything's been checked, rechecked, and double-checked. Now it's all in the hands of Starship." The seconds ticked away. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3. And then, a deafening roar. The launch was flawless. As the Starship prototype blasted off the launch pad, the team erupted into cheers, their relief evident in the loud applause that followed. But for Elon, the real test had just begun. The rocket ascended into the sky, its engines roaring, leaving a trail of flame behind. It was a thing of beauty, a symbol of everything that SpaceX had fought for. For a brief moment, Elon allowed himself to feel a sense of triumph. But he knew that the real challenge would come later. As Starship soared into the atmosphere, Elon's mind remained focused. The flight was progressing as expected, but they were still in the most critical part of the mission, the return and landing. The Starship reached the apex of its flight, then began its descent. As it fell back toward Earth, everything seemed to move in slow motion. The team watched in suspense as the vehicle fell toward the launch site, its heat shields glowing red-hot as it re-entered the atmosphere. The tension in the room was unbearable. Then, with a final, breathless moment, the engines fired once again, and the Starship touched down on the landing pad with a soft thud. The cheers that followed were louder than ever before, echoing through the facility. SpaceX had just achieved something that no one had ever done before, a successful orbital flight and landing with a fully reusable spacecraft designed for Mars. Elon stood still, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He had done it. But even as the celebration began, he knew there was no time to waste. This success was just a stepping stone. They were still a long way from Mars. The aftermath of the test flight was a whirlwind. The media, who had been so quick to doubt them, now hailed SpaceX as a pioneering force in the space industry. Investors flooded in with new funding, eager to get involved in the next phase of the Mars mission. The world's perception of SpaceX had completely changed. But for Elon, the recognition was secondary. The real work was just beginning. The world had witnessed something incredible, but the road to Mars was still long, uncertain, and fraught with challenges. There was no room for complacency. As the weeks passed, Elon returned to the drawing board, refining Starship further, addressing every issue, and working with his team to develop the systems necessary for human space travel. His drive to reach Mars had only intensified. But in the quiet moments, when the weight of the mission became overwhelming, Elon found himself reflecting more and more on why he was doing this in the first place. It was not about being famous or wealthy. It was about the future of humanity. It was about leaving a legacy that would outlast even the most ambitious of dreams. It was about making humanity a multiplanetary species, a dream that, despite all the setbacks, was more alive than ever. The test flight had been a victory, but it was only a small part of the larger mission. Elon knew that the challenges ahead would be greater than anything they had yet faced. But he was ready. Ready to push the boundaries further than they had ever been pushed before. Ready for Mars. And with that, the countdown for the next phase began. After the successful test flight, SpaceX's accomplishments were celebrated around the world. Elon Musk's name was now synonymous with space exploration, innovation, and ambition. People admired him for his resilience and his visionary goals. Yet, as the euphoria of the success began to settle, a new reality started to take shape. The pressure to succeed was enormous. Elon wasn't just a CEO running a successful company, he was the face of the future of humanity. The pressure to continue pushing the boundaries, to reach Mars, to make the impossible a reality, weighed heavier than ever. There was no turning back now. Mars was no longer a distant dream, it was within reach. However, behind the scenes, things weren't as rosy as they seemed. Elon sat at his desk in his private office at SpaceX headquarters, staring at a series of new reports. The next test phase had begun, and things were starting to get complicated. While the Starship prototype had successfully launched and landed, the engineers were now facing challenges that they hadn't anticipated. The heat shields, which had performed well during the test, were showing signs of wear far earlier than expected. The Raptor engines, which had seemed flawless, were now revealing minor but critical issues. Elon had always known that every victory came with its own set of challenges. But this wasn't like the previous hurdles they'd faced. The stakes were higher now. Every test, every failure, every delay had consequences. SpaceX was on the edge of a massive leap, but one misstep could bring everything crashing down. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. The mission to Mars was not just a business venture anymore, it was a personal mission. He had invested everything into this dream. His time, his money, his energy. There was no margin for error. If Starship didn't perform flawlessly, the dream of sending humans to Mars could be delayed by years, maybe even decades. A knock on the door broke his concentration. "Come in," Elon said, his voice tight. Gwynne Shotwell entered, her expression serious. "We need to talk about the funding, Elon." Elon looked up, momentarily surprised. "What about it?" "We're running out of cash," Gwynne said bluntly, sitting down across from him. "As much as the investors are thrilled with the success of the test flight, we're burning through funds faster than anticipated. The next phase of development is expensive, and without an influx of capital, we're going to face some tough decisions." Elon's jaw tightened. He had been aware of the financial strain, but hearing it laid out so plainly made the pressure feel all the more real. SpaceX had always operated on the cutting edge, relying on continuous innovation and aggressive timelines. But that had always come with a cost. And now, that cost was starting to show. "I thought we had enough from the last round of investment," Elon said, his mind racing. "We did," Gwynne replied. "But now, with the unexpected delays and the need for further development, the numbers are growing. We're still committed to the mission, but the reality is that we might need to secure another round of funding before we can continue full steam ahead." Elon stood, pacing the room as he processed the information. "I can't stop now. We're so close to making history. I won't let a lack of funds be the reason we fail." "I'm not saying we stop, Elon," Gwynne said, her voice calm but firm. "But you need to think about how we're going to secure the resources to push forward. The investors are already growing restless. There's no sugarcoating this." Elon took a deep breath. The weight of it all hit him at once. The world was watching, but behind the public success, there were so many things that could go wrong. SpaceX had always been a company defined by its ability to take risks and push forward against all odds. But this time, it felt different. The costs were more than just financial. They were emotional, physical, and psychological. "Set up the meeting with the investors," Elon said finally, his voice low and resolved. "I'll figure it out. We have no other option." A few days later, Elon sat across from a group of investors in a sleek, modern conference room. The glass walls of the room offered a breathtaking view of the SpaceX campus, but the conversation was far from pleasant. "I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation, Elon," one of the investors, a wealthy venture capitalist named Charles Winter, said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You've proven that you can build rockets. That's impressive. But Mars is still a pipe dream. We need to see tangible results. We're not going to keep pouring money into this without more certainty." Elon's jaw clenched. He had heard these doubts before. But now, with SpaceX's future on the line, they felt like an unbearable weight. "We've built something no one else could. We've achieved things that NASA only dreamed of decades ago. And we're still moving forward. You don't fund a company like SpaceX to sit on the sidelines. You fund us because we're going to take humanity to new heights." Winter leaned back in his chair, clearly unconvinced. "You've proven that you can make rockets fly. But that doesn't mean we'll see Mars in our lifetime. You need to show us a clear path forward. And if that path includes more delays and cost overruns, we need to know that you can handle it." Elon felt a wave of frustration surge through him, but he kept his composure. The tension in the room was palpable. He knew that his reputation, and the future of SpaceX, hung in the balance. "I will handle it," Elon said, his voice unwavering. "I've always handled it. And I always will." I'm committed to this mission, and I believe in what we're doing. We're not just building rockets. We're changing the course of human history." Winter looked unconvinced but said nothing more. The room fell silent as Elon's words echoed in his mind. The meeting dragged on, but Elon knew that the money they needed to secure the next phase of development would not come easy. The investors were divided. Some still believed in the vision, but others were beginning to doubt the likelihood of success. It was clear that SpaceX's future would be decided not only by its technological progress but also by how well Elon could navigate these financial and political hurdles. As the days turned into weeks, Elon's resolve was tested like never before. The financial pressure weighed heavily on him, and the technical hurdles seemed insurmountable. Every decision felt more consequential than the last. The path to Mars was becoming increasingly perilous. But Elon had never been one to back down from a challenge. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with difficulties, but he also knew that he was on the brink of something extraordinary. In the quiet moments when the pressure became too much to bear, Elon reminded himself of the mission, the reason he was doing this. It wasn't for fame or fortune. It was to ensure that humanity's future didn't depend solely on Earth. Mars was the next frontier, and no matter the cost, he would do whatever it took to make it happen. He looked out the window of his office, past the stars, and imagined what it would be like to see humanity walking on the surface of another planet. No matter the price, Elon Musk would pay it. And he would lead humanity to the stars. The pressure was mounting. Elon Musk had faced countless challenges throughout his career, but the obstacles that lay before him now felt different. It wasn't just about building rockets anymore, it was about a mission that had transcended the boundaries of technology and ambition. SpaceX was no longer just a company, it had become the symbol of humanity's hope for survival, a beacon of progress that the world was watching closely. However, the weight of that expectation had its consequences. Elon was sitting at his desk late one night when Gwynne Shotwell entered his office, her expression grave. She handed him a stack of reports, and without a word, he began skimming through them. "We've got more problems than I anticipated," she said, her voice tense. "The investors are pushing harder for concrete results. And the press is beginning to turn on us. They're questioning whether we can actually pull this off." Elon nodded, flipping through the pages, his mind racing. "We always knew this would be the hardest part," he muttered under his breath. "It's not just the investors, Elon," Gwynne continued, taking a seat across from him. "We've got internal sabotage. There are whispers about dissent in the ranks, people questioning your leadership and the direction of the company. Some of our own engineers are getting cold feet. They're afraid we're reaching too far, too fast." Elon stopped reading, his eyes narrowing. "Sabotage? I don't have all the details, but there are murmurs," Gwynne said, her voice steady. "I'm not sure who's behind it, but someone's planting seeds of doubt among the team. And right now, that's the last thing we need." Elon leaned back in his chair, absorbing the weight of her words. He had been through so many struggles already, technical failures, funding crises, and public ridicule, but this was a new kind of challenge. Internal betrayal was a dangerous game. It could undermine everything he had worked so hard to build. "I'll handle it," Elon said, his tone colder than usual. "Set up a meeting with the key engineers. I want to know who's behind this." The next morning, a tense meeting was held in SpaceX's main conference room. Elon sat at the head of the table, flanked by Gwynne and other senior leaders. One by one, the key engineers filtered in, their faces betraying a mix of nervousness and reluctance. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion, and it was clear that things weren't as harmonious as they seemed on the surface. "I need to know who's questioning the mission," Elon said, his voice calm but firm. "Who's spreading doubts among the team?" The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke. Elon's gaze swept across the room, his eyes sharp. "You don't need to worry about hurting anyone's feelings. What we need right now is transparency. We're all in this together, or none of us will make it. So if there are concerns, serious concerns, speak up. If you're not on board, this mission isn't going to work. Still, no one answered. Gwyn, sensing the tension, spoke up. Elon's right. We can't afford this kind of division. If there's something you're worried about, we need to address it, now. No more secrets. Finally, one of the senior engineers, a man named Jason, spoke up, his voice hesitant. It's not that we're not on board with the mission, Elon. It's just, there's a lot of pressure. The speed at which we're pushing forward, the risks, we're all just a little concerned. Some of us are wondering if we're moving too fast. Maybe we need to scale things back a bit. Take our time. Elon listened intently. Jason wasn't exactly accusing, but the hesitation was clear. This was the moment Elon had feared, the point where doubt began to infiltrate the core of SpaceX's culture. We can't scale back, Elon replied, his voice unwavering. Mars is the future of humanity. We can't afford to take our time. We're pushing forward because the stakes are that high. If we wait too long, someone else will beat us to it. And when that happens, we'll have missed our chance. We will all have missed our chance. Jason looked around the room, unsure of how to respond. The others were still quiet, and for a moment, it seemed as though no one was willing to speak out. But then another voice rose. This one came from a younger engineer, Sarah, who had been with SpaceX for several years. She was known for her intelligence and dedication, but also for her ability to think outside the box. I think what Jason's trying to say, Sarah said, her voice steady, is that we need to be sure we're not compromising the mission's integrity. It's not just about speed. It's about getting things right. We've seen how quickly things can go wrong. If we don't ensure we have the right foundation, we'll be digging ourselves into a hole we can't climb out of. Elon's gaze softened as he considered her words. He understood the concerns, but the mission had always been about taking risks, pushing boundaries. There was no room for hesitation, not now. The dream of Mars was too important. I hear you, he said, his tone calm but firm. But you have to understand, we're not going to win this by playing it safe. The world doesn't work that way. People think we're crazy. They think we'll fail. If we back off now, they'll be right. And I won't let that happen. We can't let that happen. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence wasn't oppressive, it was contemplative. Elon's words had struck a chord with the team. They knew the risks, they knew the challenges. But they also knew the opportunity that was before them. I'm not asking you to risk everything, but I am asking you to believe in this mission, Elon continued. If we pull together, we will get to Mars. If we let fear dictate our decisions, we'll never get there. The engineers looked at each other, and slowly, one by one, they nodded. Despite the resolve that had returned to the room, the sabotage issue wasn't entirely behind them. In the days that followed, Elon's team worked tirelessly, pushing forward with Starship's development. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and there was still a lingering sense of unease. It wasn't just about technical challenges anymore. It wasn't just about the fear of failure. The real danger was the internal divide, people questioning their commitment, their role, their belief in the vision that Elon had set forth. Elon had always been a visionary, but now he was facing the toughest test of his career, not just rallying his team to the mission, but keeping them united in the face of overwhelming odds. In his quiet moments, when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear, Elon couldn't help but wonder, was he pushing too hard? Was the cost of reaching Mars too great? But even in those moments of doubt, one thing was clear, he wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The mission would continue, no matter the price. Because the future of humanity depended on it. And Elon Musk would see it through, no matter what. It had been weeks since the meeting with the engineers, and the pressure was showing no signs of easing. The technical difficulties were far from resolved, and while SpaceX had made progress, the road ahead was still full of uncertainty. Elon Musk had been through countless challenges in his career, but this time, the stakes felt higher. There was no room for failure, he couldn't afford it. The news outlets had begun to pick up on the rumors swirling around SpaceX. The whispers of doubt had made their way into public consciousness. Speculation ran rampant. Could SpaceX really make it to Mars? Were they simply too ambitious? Was Elon Musk pushing the limits of reality too far? The clock was ticking. Elon could feel the weight of those doubts bearing down on him more and more with each passing day. It was late one evening when Elon found himself sitting in his office at SpaceX headquarters, staring out the window at the starry sky. The stars, once distant dreams, now seemed closer than ever. But that didn't make them any easier to reach. The challenges that SpaceX faced were mounting, and as the leader of this mission, Elon knew he had to remain calm, collected, and resolute. There could be no wavering in his vision. But even he wasn't immune to the crushing weight of the situation. As he stared at the vastness of space, he couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. The team was divided. The investors were restless. And there were days when even he wasn't sure if the dream of Mars was within reach. Just as he was lost in thought, his phone buzzed on the desk. He looked at the screen. It was a message from Gwynne Shotwell. "We need to talk. Urgent." Elon immediately dialed her number. "Elon," Gwynne's voice came through the phone, sounding strained. "We've got a problem. It's bigger than we thought. There's a leak in the company. Some of our internal data has been sent to the media. They're calling it a scandal. Elon's heart sank. "What kind of data?" "It's about the delays. The cost overruns. They've got documents showing that we're not meeting the timelines we promised. The media's spinning it as though we've failed." Elon ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. "How did they get this?" "We don't know yet, but we need to act fast," Gwynne continued. "The last thing we need right now is the public turning on us. We've worked too hard to let this kind of leak jeopardize everything." Elon leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. He had anticipated the press turning on him eventually, but this felt different. This wasn't just the usual skepticism, this was a full-on attack on the integrity of SpaceX. "I'll take care of it," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Get the legal team involved. We need to find out who's behind this and shut it down. And we'll need to make a public statement, clear the air before the damage is too great." The next morning, Elon arrived at SpaceX headquarters early. His mind was racing, and the weight of everything pressing down on him felt heavier than ever. He had been through public scrutiny before, but this was a different animal entirely. The media had always been skeptical of him, but now they had something they could use to undermine the entire mission. As he walked through the sleek, modern halls of SpaceX's headquarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a sense of unease in the air, as though the team was no longer united. The energy that had once been electric now felt tense and uncertain. He met with Gwynne and the legal team to discuss the next steps. They had already begun investigating how the leak had happened, but the bigger issue was the PR nightmare they were facing. The media was tearing into SpaceX, highlighting the delays and the rising costs. Elon knew he had to act quickly. He couldn't let this snowball into something larger than it already was. "We're going to need a statement," Gwynne said. "We can't afford to let this drag on. The longer we remain silent, the more the media will have to work with." Elon nodded, his mind already working on the best approach. "The truth. We have to be honest about where we are, but we also have to remind people why we're doing this. This isn't just about getting rockets to fly, this is about the future of humanity." Gwynne hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Elon, you're right. But you also have to realize that some people may not be able to see the bigger picture. The investors, the public, they're going to want to see results, and they're going to want them soon. Elon clenched his jaw. He knew the reality of the situation, but it didn't make it any easier to swallow. I've always said that we're going to do this at our own pace. We don't have the luxury of waiting for everyone else to catch up. I'm not backing down now. The legal team began drafting a public statement, but Elon couldn't help but feel that it wasn't enough. The leak wasn't just about bad press, it was a sign of deeper issues within the company. If they couldn't resolve the internal division, if they couldn't get everyone aligned behind the mission, SpaceX was in trouble. Later that day, Elon called a company-wide meeting. He knew that the time had come to address the team directly, to speak to them as the leader who had been with them from the very beginning. As the engineers, designers, and managers gathered in the large conference room, Elon stood at the front, his expression firm but solemn. He could sense the tension in the room. Everyone knew that things were not as they should be. There was a quiet hum of discontent among the ranks, and it was clear that the unity SpaceX once had was fraying at the edges. I know there's been a lot of noise, Elon began, his voice steady but filled with authority. And I know that many of you are feeling the pressure. I feel it too. The leaks, the media attacks, the mounting challenges, it's all a lot to take in. But let's be clear about one thing, none of this is going to stop us. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. We're not just building rockets. We're building the future. The road to Mars is not going to be easy, and I won't pretend it will be. But I promise you, it will be worth it. All of it. Elon looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the engineers who had been with him since the early days. He could see the doubt in some of their faces, the uncertainty, the fatigue. But he also saw the spark of hope, the belief in the mission. We've had setbacks, he continued. We've had failures. But that's how we learn. And that's how we move forward. If we can't get through this together, we don't deserve to make it to Mars. But I believe in each and every one of you. And I know you believe in the mission too. There was a long silence, but then, slowly, one by one, the engineers began to nod. The room shifted, the tension lifting just a little. Elon could feel the shift, this was the turning point. The team needed reassurance, and he had given it to them. But make no mistake, Elon said, his voice growing more intense. We are not stopping. Not for anything. Not for anyone. Mars is waiting. And we're going to be the ones to get there. As the meeting concluded, Elon stepped out of the room, his mind still racing. The road ahead was still filled with obstacles, technical failures, financial struggles, and now, the threat of internal sabotage. But in that moment, he knew one thing for certain, there was no turning back. SpaceX had a mission to complete, and no matter the cost, they were going to see it through. Mars was closer than ever, but the fight to get there was just beginning. The following days felt like a blur. Elon and his team were working around the clock to repair the damage from the media leak, and while the immediate crisis had been addressed, a nagging feeling lingered in the back of his mind. The sabotage that Gwyn had warned him about, the whispers of dissent within the ranks, hadn't gone away. It was like a shadow, lurking just beyond the reach of his attention. Despite his best efforts to rally the troops, Elon couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. Someone within SpaceX, someone who should have been in lockstep with the mission, was undermining the work they were all doing. It was a quiet Wednesday evening when Gwyn called him into her office. The mood was somber, and Elon could tell immediately that this wasn't going to be a routine update. Elon, she began, her voice low, I've got something you need to see. She handed him a folder, thick with documents and emails. As Elon flipped through them, his heart sank. They've been selling us out, Gwyn continued. I've been investigating the leak, and we've traced it back to someone inside the company. It's one of our senior engineers, Jason. Elon felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. Jason had been with SpaceX for years. He was brilliant, dedicated, and someone Elon had trusted. The news hit him like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, selling us out?" Elon asked, his voice strained. "It's not just the leak," Gwyn explained, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "Jason has been meeting with competitors. He's been feeding them information about our progress, our failures, even our internal struggles. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of data." Elon's mind raced. This was more than just a betrayal, it was a direct attack on the company. If Jason had been working with competitors, if he had been actively trying to undermine SpaceX, the consequences could be catastrophic. "Where's Jason now?" Elon demanded. "I've already spoken to him," Gwyn replied. "He's gone. He's been fired, and we've cut all ties with him. But I wanted to give you a heads up before you hear about it in the press. It's going to get messy." Elon ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts spinning. He'd known that the road to Mars would be fraught with challenges, but this was different. A trusted member of his team, someone who had been there from the beginning, had sabotaged the very thing they were all working toward. It felt like a personal betrayal, and the weight of it was almost unbearable. "I need to address this publicly," Elon said, his voice steady, though his insides were roiling. "We need to make it clear that we don't tolerate this kind of behavior. The world's already watching us. We can't afford to let this undermine everything." Gwyn nodded. "I'll have the PR team prepare a statement. But we'll need to move quickly, before it spirals out of control." The next day, SpaceX released a statement, confirming the leak and the termination of Jason's employment. Elon made sure to emphasize that the company had acted swiftly to address the issue and that they were committed to maintaining the highest standards of integrity and transparency. The press release was carefully worded, but Elon knew it wouldn't be enough to silence the growing storm. The media was already circling, eager for more details, hungry for the next headline. They would twist the story, turning Jason's betrayal into a narrative that could damage SpaceX's reputation even further. The next few days were a whirlwind of interviews, press conferences, and internal meetings. Elon was forced to face the fallout head-on, answering tough questions and defending SpaceX's commitment to its mission. But despite his best efforts to steer the conversation back to the big picture, the importance of their work, the future of humanity, every headline seemed to focus on the scandal. It was exhausting, but Elon wasn't about to back down. If anything, the crisis only strengthened his resolve. The path to Mars was never going to be easy, and now, more than ever, he understood that. But every challenge they faced, whether external or internal, was just another obstacle to overcome. He couldn't afford to let this derail their progress. Mars was still waiting. Later that week, Elon sat down with Gwyn again. They had just wrapped up another round of interviews, and the stress was beginning to take its toll. Elon hadn't had a moment of peace in days, and it was starting to show. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," he admitted, running a hand over his face. "The media won't stop. The pressure's relentless, and now I have to deal with this betrayal from within. How do I keep pushing forward when it feels like the whole world is against us?" Gwyn sat across from him, her face serious but understanding. "I know this is hard, Elon. But you've been through worse. This is just another test. You've built SpaceX from nothing, and now it's time to show the world what we're really made of. This mission is bigger than any one person, bigger than any company. And that's why we can't stop now." Elon stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. SpaceX wasn't just about him, it was about something much greater. The dream of Mars wasn't just his, it belonged to everyone who had believed in him, to every engineer, every scientist, every person who had worked tirelessly to make this dream a reality. "I'm not backing down," Elon said quietly. "I never have, and I never will." Gwyn smiled faintly. "That's the Elon Musk I know." As the days passed, Elon's resolve hardened. The betrayal, while painful, had only made him more determined to see SpaceX through to the end. The team was stronger than any single person, Jason's actions had proven that. And now, it was time for them to come together and prove that nothing could stop them. In the midst of the chaos, Elon received an unexpected visitor. It was one of the junior engineers, Sarah, the same woman who had spoken up during the meeting about the company's direction. She had been with SpaceX for several years and had gained a reputation for being both brilliant and fearless. "Elon, can I talk to you for a minute?" Sarah asked, her voice tentative but confident. "Of course, Sarah. What's on your mind?" She hesitated before speaking. "I just wanted to say that we're all behind you. The team, we're in this together. I know things have been tough lately, but we believe in you. We believe in SpaceX. And we're not going anywhere." Elon was taken aback by her words. It wasn't often that people spoke so openly, so unreservedly. But in that moment, he realized something important. Despite the sabotage, despite the doubts and betrayals, the heart of SpaceX, the spirit of the people working there, was still intact. "Thank you," Elon said, his voice filled with gratitude. "That means more to me than you know." The mission continued, and though the road was rocky, Elon knew he couldn't allow the setbacks to define them. SpaceX was bigger than one person's betrayal, and it was stronger than the doubts that plagued them. The dream of Mars was alive, and no matter what, Elon would see it through. No matter what it took. The weeks that followed Jason's betrayal were a blur of late-night meetings, tense discussions, and a growing sense of paranoia within the walls of SpaceX. Elon had made it clear to everyone that SpaceX would push forward, no matter what. But in the back of his mind, something nagged at him. It wasn't just the internal sabotage, it was something far more dangerous, something that was lurking in the background, quietly waiting for the right moment to strike. The competitors in the aerospace industry had always been watching SpaceX with a mix of envy and skepticism. But now, the pressure was mounting, and Elon knew that there was one company in particular that posed the most significant threat to their mission: Blue Origin. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Blue Origin, was no stranger to ambition. While SpaceX focused on the bold vision of Mars, Blue Origin had been quietly working on their own path to space, focusing on space tourism and developing reusable rockets for commercial use. While the two companies had different focuses, the underlying competition between them had always been intense. But recently, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening at Blue Origin, something more aggressive, more calculated than usual. Their recent developments in rocket technology were advancing faster than expected, and their recent push into lunar exploration hinted that they were planning something much bigger than anyone had anticipated. Elon stood in front of a whiteboard in the conference room, his mind racing with possibilities. Gwyn, his most trusted ally, was by his side, and they were joined by several of SpaceX's senior engineers. A strategy meeting was underway. "Elon, I've been following Blue Origin's latest developments," Gwyn said, her voice serious. "They're not just sitting back and watching anymore. They're accelerating their projects. Their new rocket design is remarkably similar to ours in some respects. And their long-term goal? They're aiming for the moon first. I think they're trying to get there before us." Elon absorbed her words, his brow furrowed in thought. He had been tracking Blue Origin's progress, but this revelation hit hard. The moon mission wasn't something they had focused on directly, at least not in the immediate term. SpaceX had always been driven by the goal of reaching Mars, but Blue Origin's focus on the moon was both strategic and, more importantly, personal. Bezos had always had his sights set on controlling the future of space, and it was becoming clearer by the day that he was willing to do whatever it took to get there first. "They've got more resources than we realize," Elon said, tapping the whiteboard with a marker. "And they're starting to play dirty. They might be waiting for us to fail so they can swoop in with a solution. They'll promise everything to the government, they'll secure contracts, and the public will eat it up. We need to act fast." Gwyn nodded. "We can't afford to wait any longer. SpaceX has been under fire for too long. We need to remind everyone why we're the leaders in this industry. The race to Mars is important, but we can't let anyone outpace us to the moon. It's a foothold. A launch pad for everything else. Elon took a deep breath, his mind already working through the possible scenarios. They had to move quickly, and they needed a big win to restore faith in SpaceX. The launch of the Starship was still the centerpiece of their mission, but they needed something more immediate. They needed momentum. We'll accelerate our lunar program, Elon said, his voice firm. We'll aim for the first private, crewed mission to the moon, before they can. And we'll do it with the best technology, the best team. Let's make it happen. The room buzzed with energy as the team jumped into action, brainstorming ideas and making plans to fast-track the lunar program. Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose as they began outlining the details. This was it, this was their moment to fight back. SpaceX was going to show the world that they were the true pioneers of space exploration. But even as the team began to move forward with their plan, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that Blue Origin wasn't the only threat they faced. A few days later, Elon sat in his office, reviewing the latest data from SpaceX's Mars program when his phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from an anonymous source, someone who claimed to have inside information. Be careful. You're being watched. Someone in your company is feeding information to Blue Origin. Watch your back. Elon felt a chill run down his spine. The message was cryptic, but the meaning was clear, someone at SpaceX was still working against him. The leak wasn't just a one-time incident, it was part of a larger, more sinister campaign to derail SpaceX's progress. He immediately forwarded the message to Gwyn, and within minutes, they were on a call discussing the implications. This has to be from someone with access to our internal systems, Gwyn said, her voice tense. It's not just sabotage, it's espionage. Elon's mind raced. The stakes were higher now than ever before. Not only were they fighting to stay ahead of Blue Origin, but they had an enemy within their own walls. The trust that had once been the foundation of SpaceX was now crumbling, and it was becoming harder to distinguish friend from foe. We need to tighten security, Elon said, his voice low. I don't care how we do it, but we need to find out who's behind this, and fast. Gwyn agreed. I'll have our security team investigate the leak and start monitoring internal communications. We can't afford another hit. Elon sat back in his chair, running a hand over his face. The situation was deteriorating faster than he had expected. But one thing was certain, if they were going to succeed, they needed to act now. They couldn't let the shadow of betrayal continue to loom over SpaceX. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure continued to mount. The race to the moon had become a priority, but the sabotage from within still weighed heavily on Elon's mind. The engineers worked tirelessly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching their every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, on one particularly tense evening, he received a call from Gwyn. Her voice was strained, and Elon knew immediately that something had gone terribly wrong. Elon, we've got a problem, she said, her words urgent. We've traced the leak, and it's not who we thought it was. Elon's heart raced. Who is it? It's someone you've trusted, for a long time. It's Chris Lindsley, our head of propulsion. Elon's mind went blank for a moment. Chris had been with SpaceX since the beginning. He was a key player in the development of the Falcon rockets. The thought that he could be involved in espionage felt like a punch to the gut. I need you to bring him in, Elon said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the situation. This ends now. As Gwyn made arrangements to confront Chris, Elon's mind raced. The walls were closing in around him. Not only was SpaceX facing intense competition from Blue Origin, but now, they were being torn apart from within. The next day, Elon stood in front of Chris Lindsley. His face was unreadable as he stared down the man who had been one of the pillars of SpaceX's success. Chris, we know what you've been doing, Elon said, his voice firm. You've been feeding information to Blue Origin. And now, you're going to have to answer for it. Chris's face drained of color. For the first time in years, Elon saw a man who had once been a confidant look guilty, and frightened. Why? Elon demanded, his voice cutting through the silence. Why betray everything we've worked for? Chris's voice trembled as he spoke. I didn't mean for it to get this far. They promised me, money, power, everything I've ever wanted. I thought I could control it, but it's out of my hands now. I never thought it would go this far. Elon shook his head, a sense of betrayal heavy in his chest. There's no turning back now, Chris. You've crossed a line. And for that, there's no forgiveness. As security escorted Chris out of the building, Elon felt a cold realization settle in. SpaceX had become a battlefield, not just against competitors, but against the people within their own walls. The mission to Mars and the Moon was still alive. But now, the fight was more than just technical, it was personal. And Elon Musk knew that this was only the beginning. Despite the chaos swirling around him, betrayal from within, rising tensions with Blue Origin, and the constant media scrutiny, Elon Musk was resolute. The pressure was mounting, but he could feel a new fire stirring inside him. It wasn't just about Mars anymore. The race to the Moon had become a new battleground, and SpaceX would not be left behind. The events surrounding the internal leak, the sabotage from Chris, and the shadow of Blue Origin's aggressive moves had taken a toll on the team, but SpaceX was still strong. Despite the betrayals, the accusations, and the mounting challenges, Elon knew that the heart of SpaceX still beat within its people. They were warriors, every one of them. And together, they could overcome anything. Elon sat in a high-tech conference room in SpaceX headquarters, the screens around him displaying detailed plans for the next phase of their lunar mission. He was joined by Gwyn, who was as focused as ever, and a handful of senior engineers who were working tirelessly on the designs for the next iteration of Starship, this time, for a crewed lunar mission. Elon, I think we're ready to move forward, Gwyn said, glancing over at him. The team has reworked the designs. The new Starship model will be able to carry the crew and necessary payload to the Moon, and back, without any issues. We've tested the boosters, the engines, and the life support systems. Elon looked at the display, which showed a digital rendering of the new Starship configuration designed specifically for the lunar mission. Everything looked perfect. It had to. They were racing against time, and if Blue Origin beat them to the Moon, it could change everything for SpaceX's future. We've made a lot of progress, Elon said, his voice calm, but underneath, there was a palpable sense of urgency. But we can't afford any setbacks. We need to launch this as soon as possible, before anyone else gets the chance to beat us to the punch. Gwyn nodded in agreement. I'll make sure we have the necessary resources, but the timing has to be perfect. If we push too hard and miss a critical detail, it could backfire. Elon's mind flashed back to the day he learned about the sabotage from Chris. The feeling of betrayal had been crushing, but now it steeled his resolve. The path forward was clear, and they could not afford to waste a second. We need to double down on security, tighten our communication channels, Elon continued. I don't want another leak, especially not now. If we're going to win this race, we need to be a united front. No distractions. As the team worked around the clock to prepare for the lunar mission, Elon couldn't help but feel the weight of his responsibility. SpaceX's mission was always about more than just making money, it was about building the future, about humanity's ability to survive and thrive beyond Earth. But now, with the betrayal of a trusted team member and the increasing pressure from competitors, the stakes were higher than ever. One evening, after a long day at the office, Elon found himself walking through the SpaceX facility, alone. The vast, silent hangars and the towering rockets gave him a sense of awe and loneliness. SpaceX was a company on the brink of greatness, but it was also a company teetering on the edge of destruction. The fragile balance between success and failure weighed heavily on his shoulders. As he walked, he encountered a group of engineers working late into the night, their faces tired but determined. They smiled as they saw him approach, and one of them, a young engineer named Sarah, spoke up. "Elon, we're all in this together," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We know what's at stake. But we believe in you. We believe in SpaceX. And we're ready for this. Whatever happens, we've got your back." Elon smiled at Sarah's words, and for a moment, the weight on his shoulders lightened. This was why he fought. For moments like this. For the people who believed in the impossible and were willing to risk everything to make it happen. "Thank you, Sarah," Elon said, his voice sincere. "We'll make it happen. Together." But as much as Elon wanted to focus on the future, there was something he couldn't ignore. The message from the anonymous source had haunted him. The warning that someone inside SpaceX was feeding information to Blue Origin. Elon had always known that SpaceX's success would attract enemies, but to have it happen from within the company he had built with his own hands, it felt like a personal betrayal. Gwynn had assured him that the security team was investigating the leak and would get to the bottom of it. But the longer it took, the more it gnawed at Elon. How many more people in his own company could he trust? And if there were more leaks, could they survive the pressure? As the lunar mission began to take shape, the stakes grew even higher. SpaceX couldn't afford a single mistake. And even as they prepared to make history, Elon knew that there was one threat hanging over everything: Blue Origin. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Blue Origin, had kept his distance from the media for some time, but recently, he had made a public statement that sent shockwaves through the industry. In a rare interview, Bezos announced that Blue Origin would be unveiling a new rocket system designed for lunar exploration, one that could rival SpaceX's Starship. It was clear that Blue Origin was positioning itself as the front-runner in the race to the moon, and they weren't about to let SpaceX win without a fight. "We're not just going to the moon. We're going to revolutionize the way humanity explores space," Bezos had said during his interview. "And we'll do it with the best technology. We'll get there first, and we'll stay there." Elon had watched the interview from his office, his fists clenched. Blue Origin's goal to be the first to land on the moon had become a reality, and it seemed like they were willing to do whatever it took to make it happen. But SpaceX wasn't about to back down. Elon had fought too hard to get this far, and the lunar mission was just as important as the Mars mission. They needed to show the world that they were still the ones pushing the boundaries of space exploration. "We need to launch before they do," Elon said to Gwynn during a late-night meeting. "We can't let them take the moon from us. Not now, not ever." Gwynn nodded. "I'll make sure the team is focused. We'll get there first, Elon. We have to." The days leading up to the lunar mission were a blur of final preparations, tests, and late nights. The pressure was immense, but the team was focused. They knew that this wasn't just about SpaceX's future, it was about the future of space exploration itself. And if they could get to the moon first, it would send a message to the world: SpaceX was unstoppable. But as Elon stood in front of the new Starship, ready to watch it embark on its historic journey, the nagging feeling about the leak still lingered in the back of his mind. It wasn't over. They hadn't won yet. There were still too many unknowns, and too many people working against him. The clock was ticking, and the race to the moon was on. But Elon Musk wasn't about to let anyone, or anything, stand in his way. The storm was coming. And it wasn't just coming from Blue Origin. It was coming from within. The day of the lunar mission had arrived, and the tension at SpaceX was palpable. The final preparations for the launch of Starship, now equipped for its most daring mission yet, were underway, and the entire team was on edge. Elon Musk stood in the operations center, watching the monitors, his eyes scanning every detail as the team ran through their final checklist. Outside, the massive Starship rocket loomed like a giant sentinel, ready to ascend into the heavens. The vehicle was a marvel of modern engineering, capable of carrying humans and supplies to the moon and beyond. But as much as the technology was impressive, Elon knew the real challenge was not the rocket, it was what waited for them on the other side. He had already seen Blue Origin's public announcements about their own lunar ambitions. Jeff Bezos had made it clear that his company would stop at nothing to secure dominance in space exploration, even if it meant running over competitors in the process. But Elon wasn't about to let that happen. He had already been burned by the betrayal within SpaceX, and he had no intention of letting his company falter now. He stood up from his seat, walking over to Gwyn, who was busy speaking with engineers. "We're ready, right?" Elon asked, his voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at him. Gwyn nodded without hesitation. "Everything's in place. The crew is prepped, the mission parameters are set, and the rocket has passed all final checks. This is it." Elon looked at the clock on the wall. The countdown had already begun. He knew the stakes had never been higher. SpaceX was on the cusp of achieving something that no private company had ever done before, land a crewed mission on the moon. It was the culmination of years of effort, sacrifice, and dreams. But as the countdown continued, his mind couldn't help but drift to the anonymous warning he had received weeks earlier. There were still too many unanswered questions about the leaks, the betrayals. A part of him still wondered, could there be more behind the scenes? Was there someone within his inner circle who had yet to be revealed as a traitor? He pushed the thought aside. He couldn't afford to let paranoia consume him now. The mission had to succeed. The countdown continued with a mechanical precision. The clock ticked down, and everyone in the room stood still, their focus sharp. Outside, the rocket stood tall, bathed in bright floodlights, ready to pierce the night sky. 10, 9, 8. The voice over the intercom was calm, but each number felt like a drumbeat in Elon's chest. He couldn't remember ever feeling this much weight on his shoulders. This wasn't just about SpaceX, it was about the future of humanity in space. And it was about the pride of his team, the people who had stuck by him through thick and thin. 7, 6, 5. The countdown continued, and Elon felt his heart rate increase. His thoughts raced through the years of setbacks, the criticism, the doubts. But here they were. They had made it. And now, they were on the verge of making history. 4, 3, 2. The entire room held its breath as the final seconds passed. 1, liftoff. The starship roared to life, its engines igniting with a fiery blast that lit up the entire launch pad. The force of the launch was almost overwhelming, but Elon stood firm. He watched the rocket ascend, knowing that in that moment, all the doubts, the betrayals, the struggles, none of it mattered. They were on their way to the moon. The engineers in the operations room erupted into applause, but Elon didn't join them. His gaze was locked on the screen as the rocket began to climb into the sky, its trajectory perfect. It was a flawless launch, so far. But as the minutes ticked by, Elon couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. The mission was too important to let his guard down now. Even as the rocket continued its ascent, he kept a close eye on every readout, every transmission from the crew. And then it happened. The anomaly. "Control, we have a slight deviation," came the voice of the mission commander over the intercom. "We're experiencing a minor fuel imbalance. It's within limits, but we're recalculating trajectory. Stand by." Elon's pulse quickened. The news wasn't catastrophic, but it was a potential setback. The crew's safety was paramount, and the slightest malfunction could cause irreparable damage. "Recalculate trajectory, and let me know when we're back on track," Elon said, his voice sharp. "I'm not taking any chances." For a moment, there was silence in the operations center. The engineers continued to monitor their screens, their faces tense. Elon watched the data feed, his mind racing with possible causes for the anomaly. Was it sabotage? A malfunction? Or something more sinister? Minutes passed, but the situation stabilized. The crew's recalculations put them back on course, and the fuel imbalance was minor. Elon breathed a small sigh of relief. "Looks like we're back on track," the mission commander reported. "Proceeding as planned." But the unease lingered. Elon wasn't convinced it was just a minor glitch. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was still trying to undermine him, undermine everything SpaceX had worked for. Hours later, Starship reached orbit, and the lunar mission was officially underway. The next phase, the descent to the moon, was still ahead, but they had made it through the most critical part, the launch. As the crew prepared for the lunar descent, Elon stood in front of the large mission display in the operations center, his eyes scanning the various systems. He felt a sense of accomplishment, but it was tempered by the growing sense of dread. The mission wasn't over. There were still too many unknowns. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Gwyn. "Elon, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Elon's heart skipped a beat. He quickly dialed her number. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tight. "It's about the anomaly," Gwyn said, her tone serious. "We've traced the source of the problem. It wasn't a malfunction. Someone intentionally tampered with the fuel systems. We've got a leak, again." Elon's blood ran cold. "Are you saying someone within SpaceX did this?" Gwyn hesitated for a moment before responding. "It looks that way. But we don't have all the details yet. We're tracing the leak, but it's clear someone from the inside knew exactly how to trigger this." Elon's mind raced. The sabotage had escalated. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop, and they were willing to risk everything. "This has to end now," Elon said, his voice a low growl. "I'll deal with this once the crew is on the moon. But we're not stopping. Not now. Not ever." As the mission progressed, the crew touched down on the moon successfully, marking a major milestone for SpaceX. But even in the euphoria of the historic achievement, Elon's mind remained clouded with the growing threat from within. The race was far from over. And now, more than ever, he understood that the greatest challenge SpaceX faced wasn't the competition from Blue Origin or the technical challenges of space exploration. It was the threat from those closest to him, the ones who sought to tear everything apart from the inside. The storm was far from over. The question now was, who would survive it? The moon landing was a success. There was no denying that. SpaceX had made history with Starship, and Elon Musk's name was now etched permanently in the annals of space exploration. Yet, amidst the celebrations and the global applause, there was an undercurrent of tension that he couldn't shake. As he watched the live feed from the lunar surface, with the astronauts planting the SpaceX flag on the moon, Elon felt a strange emptiness. Yes, they had achieved the impossible. But there was something deeply unsettling that gnawed at him. The message from Gwyn about the tampered fuel systems wasn't something he could easily dismiss. It wasn't just about sabotage, it was about trust. The thought that someone within SpaceX, the very company he had poured his life into, was betraying him was a heavy burden. The mission was just a momentary distraction from the storm brewing beneath the surface. The real enemy wasn't Blue Origin. It wasn't even the challenges of space exploration. It was the person within his company who had turned against him. Back at SpaceX headquarters, Elon was pacing in his office, his mind racing. The engineers had found traces of tampering in the fuel lines, and they were still working to trace the origin. The idea that someone had gotten close enough to his inner circle to compromise the mission felt like a personal affront. He dialed Gwyn's number, needing an update. "Gwyn," he said when she answered. "Where are we with the investigation?" "We're still going through the logs, but it's clear now that the tampering wasn't random," Gwyn replied. "This wasn't an amateur job. Whoever did this knew the systems inside and out." Elon's stomach churned. "Any suspects?" "Not yet," Gwyn said, her voice tight with frustration. "But we're narrowing it down. There's a pattern to the tampering. And some of the changes made in the systems were so subtle, they would have been almost impossible to detect during normal checks. This wasn't just sabotage, it was methodical. Elon ran a hand through his hair, his frustration mounting. How long before we can pinpoint the source? At least another 48 hours, Gwyn said. We need to be thorough. But I'll keep you updated as soon as we know something concrete. Elon ended the call, staring out of his office window. SpaceX was supposed to be his legacy. His dream of pushing humanity forward was supposed to be something that would stand the test of time. But now, it was threatened from within. He felt the weight of it all pressing down on him, threatening to crush everything he had built. He didn't have the luxury of time. The mission was ongoing. The crew on the moon was preparing to return, and he couldn't afford any more distractions. But the longer the sabotage went unchecked, the more dangerous it became. He couldn't let his guard down. Not now. Not ever. Meanwhile, in the shadows of SpaceX, the team working on the mission had no idea that one of their own was orchestrating the downfall of the company from the inside. Chris, the once trusted engineer who had been let go in the wake of the sabotage, was somewhere in the background, biding his time. He was the mastermind behind the tampering, using his knowledge of SpaceX's systems to create small, undetectable flaws that would cause havoc at the most critical moments. Chris had been consumed by jealousy, by resentment, and by a personal vendetta against Elon. It wasn't just about money or fame. Chris had once been one of Elon's most trusted engineers, but he had been cast aside after a falling out that left him feeling betrayed. That anger had festered, growing until it turned into a full-blown desire to see SpaceX crumble. He knew that sabotaging the moon mission would be a huge blow to SpaceX, and to Elon personally. It would shake the very foundation of everything Elon had built. It would force people to question the safety and integrity of SpaceX. And in Chris's mind, it would be the perfect revenge. He wasn't done yet. The tampering with the fuel systems was just the beginning. Back in the operations center, the crew on the moon was preparing to launch back to Earth. Elon's stomach turned as the countdown to their return began. He watched the screens closely, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. And then it did. "Control, we have an issue," the mission commander's voice came over the intercom. "The thrusters aren't firing properly. We're experiencing a loss of pressure in the main fuel system." Elon's heart skipped a beat. His worst fear was coming true. The tampering was more extensive than they had realized. "Report the exact status of the system," Elon barked, his voice calm but tight with concern. "Attempting to correct the pressure loss, but we're not sure if we'll be able to achieve the necessary thrust to break free from lunar orbit," the commander replied. "We're in a holding pattern. Stand by." Gwyn rushed into the room, her face pale with worry. "Elon, we've got a serious problem. It's the fuel lines again, there's been another tampering attempt. The systems are compromised." Elon's fists clenched. His pulse quickened as the reality of the situation sank in. Someone on the inside had orchestrated this, and now it was threatening to ruin everything. "We're not giving up on this mission," Elon said, his voice hard. "Get the engineers on it. Now." Gwyn nodded and turned to coordinate with the team. Elon remained rooted to the spot, his mind racing. The sabotage was more sophisticated than they had anticipated. Whoever was behind it knew exactly what they were doing. But he wasn't about to let Chris, or anyone, destroy what he had built. As the crew on the moon struggled to resolve the issue, Elon began to make calls. He needed answers. He needed to find out who was responsible. And he needed to do it quickly. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. After a series of forensic investigations and a review of the internal systems, SpaceX's security team managed to trace the tampering back to Chris. His access logs, his movements, and the patterns in the tampering all pointed to one person, the very engineer who had once been trusted by Elon himself. The betrayal was now undeniable. Elon felt a surge of rage. Chris had gone too far. But more than that, he felt a deep sense of sadness. The trust he had placed in Chris, and so many others, had been shattered. This wasn't just a professional betrayal. It was personal. As the hours dragged on, the engineers worked tirelessly to get the crew back on track. They managed to restore enough pressure in the fuel systems to get the thrusters working again, and the crew finally began their ascent back to Earth. But Elon knew this was far from over. The mission wasn't finished until the crew was safely home. And when they were, he would have to face the truth of the betrayal. There was no going back. SpaceX would never be the same. The storm was just beginning to gather its strength. And Elon Musk was about to find out just how deep the conspiracy ran. With the crew safely on their way back to Earth, Elon sat in his office, staring at the stars outside. The mission was a success, but it felt hollow. The trust he had built with his team had been shattered, and the scars of betrayal ran deep. But Elon wasn't one to wallow in defeat. He had a reputation for rising above challenges. And this was just another challenge. The storm had arrived, and now it was time to weather it. He wasn't going to let anyone take SpaceX down. Not on his watch. And the person responsible for the sabotage? Chris would pay. The price for betraying SpaceX, and Elon Musk, was steep. The return journey for the crew was a tense one. Even though the immediate crisis had been averted and they were on their way home, the weight of the sabotage still loomed over SpaceX. The crew's return to Earth would mark the end of the mission, but for Elon, it was only the beginning of a new battle, one that would require him to confront the betrayal head-on. Elon's mind raced as the crew entered re-entry phase. He was sitting in the operations center, scanning the readouts, his face drawn with exhaustion. The safety of the crew was paramount, but the anger simmering inside him couldn't be ignored. The mission had been a triumph, but the price of that triumph had been a painful, almost unbearable betrayal by one of his own. Chris had not only endangered the mission, he had endangered the lives of the very people he had once worked alongside. There was no greater breach of trust than what Chris had done, and the thought of him getting away with it was something Elon couldn't stomach. He glanced over at Gwyn, who stood at his side. Her face was tight with concern, but there was a quiet resolve in her eyes. She had always been a rock for him, someone who had shared in both the triumphs and the failures, the highs and the lows. She had been by his side for years, and now, more than ever, she knew the stakes were higher than ever before. Gwyn, Elon said quietly, his voice colder than usual. We've got to bring Chris in. He needs to be stopped. Gwyn nodded, her expression hardening. I agree. But we need to be smart about it. Chris is unpredictable, and we can't underestimate what he might do next. I don't care about being smart anymore, Elon replied, his voice barely above a whisper. We let him get too far. Now, he needs to face the consequences. Gwyn placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll get him. But we have to do it right. He's still inside our system, and we don't know what he's capable of. As the final stage of the re-entry sequence began, Elon felt the tension begin to ease. The crew would soon be home, and he could finally confront the betrayal that had eaten away at him for so long. He didn't trust anyone now, not completely. But he trusted Gwyn, and that had to be enough for now. The re-entry was flawless. The crew's return to Earth was smooth, and within hours, the spacecraft had safely landed. The ground crew rushed to the capsule, quickly securing it as they prepared to bring the astronauts back into the fold. Elon waited in the mission control room, pacing nervously. Every second felt like an eternity. The crew's safe return didn't make the weight of the situation any lighter. Chris was still out there, somewhere, his influence still looming large over SpaceX. As soon as the astronauts were safely back on Earth, Elon issued an urgent meeting. The moment had come for him to make his move. No more waiting. No more games. The conference room was eerily quiet. The senior leadership team was gathered, including Gwyn, SpaceX's head of security, and several of the engineers who had worked directly with Chris. Everyone knew what was coming. They had seen the signs for weeks. They all understood that Elon had not only orchestrated the greatest achievement of his career but had also been forced to confront a painful betrayal. "All right, everyone," Elon said as he entered the room, his eyes scanning over the team. "It's time to deal with the issue at hand." Chris. Gwyn stood beside him, her posture confident and strong. "We know it was him. The sabotage, the tampering, it's all connected to him. He's been orchestrating everything from the inside." Elon's voice grew colder. "He's not just someone who made a mistake. He's a traitor. He jeopardized the mission, and more importantly, he put people's lives at risk. And I won't stand for it." The team fell silent. There was no doubt among them. Elon's words were not those of someone seeking to punish a minor wrongdoing, they were the words of someone seeking justice for an unforgivable act. "We've traced his movements," the head of security spoke up, his voice steady. "Chris has been using a series of backdoors in our systems. He's been leaking information to the highest bidder. We've got proof." Elon's eyes narrowed. "So he's not working alone?" "It doesn't appear so," the security officer continued. "We suspect there's a larger network behind him, but we haven't been able to confirm who's funding or supporting him." Elon's anger grew, but he kept it in check. "We deal with Chris first. We have to make an example of him. And when we do, we'll find out who else is involved." He turned to Gwyn. "I want him brought in, now. We're not going to let him walk away from this." Gwyn nodded. "Already on it. We'll bring him in. And we'll make sure he pays for what he's done." The next hours were a blur. The SpaceX security team tracked down Chris, who had been hiding out in a small apartment just outside of the city. They had located him, and they were ready to bring him in. Elon stood in the conference room, staring at the large screen, waiting for the news. His heart beat steadily in his chest, each second closer to the inevitable confrontation. And then it happened. "Chris has been detained," the head of security reported. "He's been taken into custody." Elon let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. It was over. For now. He turned to the team. "Good. Now, let's make sure he understands the cost of what he did." The interrogation room was dimly lit, the walls closing in around Chris as he sat, shackled, in a cold metal chair. His once confident demeanor had evaporated, replaced with a nervous sweat and an underlying fear that even he couldn't suppress. Elon entered the room, Gwyn close behind him. Chris looked up, his eyes locking with Elon's. "You really thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" Elon's voice was steady, but there was an edge of cold fury in his tone. Chris sneered. "You're just another billionaire. You think you own everything. SpaceX. The whole damn space industry. You're nothing." Elon stepped closer, his voice lowering to a threatening whisper. "I don't need to own the industry. I need to make sure that the people who tried to destroy it understand one simple thing: you don't mess with SpaceX. Not with me, and not with the future of humanity." Chris tried to look defiant, but there was no hiding the fear in his eyes now. "You'll never stop me," he muttered. Elon's lips curled into a thin smile. "We'll see about that." Hours later, Chris was behind bars. The investigation into the larger conspiracy was ongoing, but SpaceX had taken its first step toward reclaiming its future. Elon stood in the same conference room, his mind racing with thoughts of everything that had happened. But there was something else in his heart, something that had started to grow stronger after every betrayal and every setback. It was the feeling that, despite the pain, despite the scars, SpaceX had survived. And with it, so had he. The moon landing had been just the beginning. The future of space exploration, of humanity's expansion into the stars, was still unfolding. And Elon Musk wasn't about to let anyone take that away from him. As he walked out of the room, he turned back one last time to look at the team he had built. There were challenges ahead, no doubt. But in the end, they would overcome them. Because this was just the beginning. And with SpaceX, the future had no limits. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?